Please be seated. Okay, dear colleagues, please be seated. Dear colleagues, the sitting is open. We have now the annual activity report 2020 by the Council of Europe Commissioner for Human Rights. So we will hear our dear friend Dunja Mijatovic. After your address, Dunja, as you know, you will take questions. As I always say, questions are the ownership of those who put them to you, and you are master of your answers. Without any delay, because I think that many people wish to put questions to you, so I would like to give you the floor right away and hear your statement. Dear colleagues, please now be attentive to the address of our Human Rights Commissioner, Dunja Mijatovic. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, Deputy Secretary General, distinguished parliamentarians present here, but also in cyberspace, Excellencies. It is my great pleasure to have this opportunity to, first of all, return to this very important room for our debates and discussions, but at the same time also for the opportunity to share some of the issues from past year and also to give you the opportunity to ask any questions you might have. For more than 1 year, countries across the world have been battling with the spread of COVID-19 and its calamitous effects on people's lives. My first thoughts today are with families who have lost loved ones and with those who are bearing the brunt of the economic, social and educational hardships that the pandemic has generated. The COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the erosion of the democratic fabric of our societies, on which ultimately depends the protection of human rights. The pandemic has revealed the tragic clarity, the many inequalities that exist in our countries. Worse, we must acknowledge that social inequalities have actually grown in recent decades. This has had a dramatic effect on the health outcomes of especially disadvantaged groups, including persons with disabilities, those in institutional settings, the homeless, migrants, and people with precarious employment and living conditions, among them many women. The case of older people is emblematic, and I address it at the very beginning of the first lockdown. In many of our member states, they have paid a particularly high price because of their generally frail health status, because of their heightened risk of exposure to the virus in social settings in which many of them live, and because of lockdown measures that have isolated them from their families and the rest of the community. The pandemic has also, I would say, shone a light on the structural problems affecting health systems in many of our member states after years of austerity measures, neglect, and corruption that have eroded public health infrastructures, personnel, but also resources. As I stressed in an issue paper on the right to health that I published this February, states must, without delay, build more inclusive and resilient healthcare systems. These must offer universal health coverage based on strong primary health care, a skilled and well-respected health workforce, more equality, and dignity for patients, the promotion and transparency and accountability in relevant decision-making. Better health communication policies as well, and crucially, effective leadership and governance. Member States must also pay due attention to the essential social determinants of health, social protection, living conditions, working environment, and education. While the pandemic is still sowing sorrow all over the world, there is also hope that science will help reach the end of this tunnel. For this to happen, however, it is crucial that politicians and health and administrative staff rise to the challenge of this extraordinary situation. If scientists are focusing and really spending their times in order to invent or to use the therapeutics needed to fight the pandemic, authorities must figure out the logistics to ensure the quick and fair distribution of medicines and vaccines, both among the whole population and globally. And I know that this was a topic of several debates in the last few days. Healthcare is a human right and a universal imperative. The response to the pandemic must be comprehensive and must be global, as nationalist tendencies only risk increasing the already high individual, societal, and financial costs. Making vaccinations, as well as testing and treatment, accessible to all is both a crucial step to defeat the pandemic and a test of the political will to address the deeply embedded structural weaknesses and inequalities of public health systems in Europe. States must act now to protect more effectively the human right to the highest attainable standards of physical and mental health across Europe. The pandemic has also shown the urgency of reforming mental health care in many of our member states. Let me elaborate on this a bit further. Mental health is not only a medical question, but a psychosocial one, including because of the prevailing attitudes in society towards persons facing mental health problems. This stigma is perpetuated by the continued excessive use of involuntary placement and coercive psychiatric practices. These are still, unfortunately, widely in use despite the lack of real scientific evidence for their effectiveness and the fact that they are at variance with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which 46 of our member states and the EU as the organization are party to. I have recently published my thoughts on how member states can speed up their transition from an institution and coercion-based biomedical model of mental health towards a community-based and recovery-oriented model based on consent. In this connection, I share the concerns already expressed by this very Assembly and other international bodies about the additional protocol to the Oviedo Convention concerning involuntary placements and treatments, which will be presented for adoption shortly. The protocol appears to be based on an outdated, overly medical model of mental health, which is at odds with the UN Convention and the long-standing need to eliminate coercive practices in mental health care services. This approach has already alienated persons with disabilities, and risks further damaging the Council of Europe's image in a period where the grave dangers for persons in institutions, including involuntary patients in psychiatric hospitals, have just so tragically been exposed by the COVID-19 pandemic. I think national parliaments have a role to play in ensuring governments protect human rights and avert these risks. At our last meeting in October, I highlighted that the pandemic has also served in a way as a magnifying glass on persisting violence against women, gender inequalities, and barriers in women's access to sexual and reproductive health care. Regrettably, last month, there was an additional, I would call it, regression which is not linked to the pandemic in any way. Turkey's decision to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention gave us, I would say, a terrible signal and marked a huge setback for women's rights. This decision is simply wrong, as it endangers women in Turkey and potentially beyond. In Poland, senior officials have also signaled their intention to leave the convention. In those countries which have not yet ratified or even signed the convention, opponents to the convention might feel emboldened to continue spreading misconceptions, misinformation, and uninformed claims made with a misogynist and at the same time homophobic agenda. It is worth repeating in this very room, which has often been the human rights conscience of Europe, that the aim of the Convention is to protect women from violence inflicted on them because they are women. Acting according to this goal, protecting women's rights and promoting gender equality is a litmus test for member states' commitment to human rights. It is our shared duty to ensure that none of the Council of Europe member states fails women and girls, and I will therefore continue to call on member states to ratify and fully implement the Istanbul Convention. I think at least this is something we can do in the 21st century. Another long-standing problem that has worsened in 2020 is the increasing pressure on human rights defenders. And you know that human rights defenders are very important in my mandate and also very, very important in my work. So the increasing pressure on human rights defenders at the whims of state authorities or criminal networks is something that we see all the time. For years, my office has worked with courageous, extremely active human rights defenders in many fields, and I wish to use this opportunity once again to salute their strength, their courage in the face of such adversity. Without them, society would be much worse off, particularly in times of crisis, and I hope you agree with me on this. I have continued working and exchanging with them, in particular with respect to combating Afrophobia, the efforts to safeguard the environment, and the protection of the rights of LGBTI people. Racism and racial discrimination against people of African descent remain widespread yet unacknowledged problem in Europe, as I stressed in a report published last month. People of African descent continue to be exposed to particularly grave forms of racism and racial discrimination, including racial stereotyping, racist violence, racial profiling in policing and criminal justice, and practices which perpetuate social and economic inequalities. The situation is compounded by the prevailing denial of these problems, even when they are reliably attested, and the lack of public debate on Afrophobia in Europe. It is a high time to recognize these concerns and to take measures to combat Afrophobia more effectively. There is also a need to protect human rights defenders working on combating Afrophobia against attacks and harassment, and to ensure that they have a voice in national policy making. Another area that I already mentioned, where human rights defenders play a very active role, is protecting the environment. And that is also a topic that is very high on the international agenda. But here I would like to focus on defenders. Those who work to prevent environmental degradation in Europe work to safeguard our basic rights. Environmental protection and human rights are indeed two sides, if I can call it so, of the same coin. Regrettably, many human rights defenders bringing the truth to light on environmental issues in Europe do so at considerable risk of violent physical, verbal, and cyber attacks. States must urgently get more serious about looking after the environment and defending environmental defenders to protect human rights. It is important to mention as well that all these findings and information I'm sharing with you is based on numerous meetings and discussions I had with human rights defenders in the previous year. Sadly, LGBTI human rights defenders are in similar situation. Their ability to do human rights advocacy has been weakened over the past year because of COVID-19. Many LGBTI organizations had to, in a way, redirect their work towards humanitarian assistance for members of their community hit by the pandemic, and they lost funding. This weakening of LGBTI civil society is happening at the very moment when we are also seeing increased attacks against the equal rights of LGBTI people across our continent. There are clear emerging patterns in the types of obstacles faced by LGBTI activists in several European countries. These include insufficient funding, verbal attacks, hate speech, online and judicial harassment, as well as leaks in personal data. Instead of clamping down or ignoring human rights defenders, national authorities should support their work and cooperate with them. It is both a legal, but I would also say a moral duty. Another topic that has been high on my agenda since the beginning of my mandate is the protection of the human rights of refugees and migrants. Backsliding in the protection of the lives of rights and refugees and migrants is worsening and causing thousands of avoidable deaths each year. As I stressed in the report published last month as my distress call to member states, the situation is particularly deplorable in the Mediterranean. Shipwrecks continue to take lives. States have disengaged from rescue operations and are hindering the work of NGOs, thus forfeiting their well-established legal obligation to rescue people in distress at sea. On top of this, cooperation activities with third countries have been enhanced despite the undeniable evidence of serious human rights violations, and the COVID-19 pandemic has been used as a convenient pretext to adopt even more restrictive measures against migrants. During the pandemic, some politicians have continued to fuel intolerance, hatred against migrants and ethnic minorities, including Roma. I said this before, but I think it bears repeating that this is a moment to foster unity and solidarity, and that there is no place in this context for hate speech and discriminatory measures. History will be the judge of the political will shown now to overcome this crisis together. None of these problems are new. We have discussed them on several occasions. Regrettably, little progress has been achieved, and laws and practices have further undermined the ability of people to enjoy their universal human rights. It is, in my view, a high time for national authorities in our member states to put an end to this shameful situation. Your role as parliamentarians is fundamental, not only to keep the governments accountable, but also to adopt laws that are in line with the human rights obligations that your countries have pledged to comply with. So we should also ask ourselves, why is this not happening? Why suddenly we are neglecting it all? Last point. I have just come back from a contact mission to Ukraine that had been a long time coming. Unfortunately, my mission happened to coincide with a very worrying rise in tensions, ceasefire violations, and reported military buildup at the border. But it was very good for me to finally engage with the authorities, civil society, national human rights bodies in Kiev in good and frank discussion on many topics, including on the ratification of the Istanbul Convention, on the issues related to language laws and minority rights, and of course, the situation in a non-government controlled areas. Even if, after numerous discussions in the past 3 years, including my recent visit, I held with officials, it is clear to me now that my physical access to Crimea remains an extremely remote possibility. I intend, nevertheless, to continue doing human rights work for the people living in Crimea and in eastern Ukraine, in a way I deem appropriate in accordance with my mandate. This is also what I heard from many activists, journalists, human rights defenders, representatives of Crimean Tatars that I met with. As all other Europeans, people living in those areas, they must be able to rely on the effective protection of the Council of Europe. I look forward to returning to Ukraine for a full country visit, hopefully before end of this year. Ladies and gentlemen, all over Europe, today human rights, democracy, and the rule of law are under enormous pressure. We cannot afford to keep eroding them. We need, I would say, a renewed impetus to narrow the gap between standards and reality. The many challenges that our societies are facing and will continue definitely to face require us to give greater prominence, not less, but greater prominence to human rights in our societies, starting with more emphasis on the equal enjoyment of social and economic rights, equal access to health care and education for all, not just for a few. The longer we wait, the more difficult it will be to keep Europe as the home of freedom, justice, and human dignity. And I know that this is a last thing we want to have these rights being challenged even further. Thank you very much. Now I would be ready to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. We will now head into the questions. As we pledged to do, we will have one speaker, one question per political group, after which you, Madam Commissioner, will give an answer if you wish to do so. And if we still have time after that, we will go by 5 questions at a time. We need to stop at 5 o'clock sharp because then we got the next item on our issue. Without any due delay, we will start with the group Socialists and Greens and Democrats with, if I'm right, Marietta Karamanli. Is she online? Voilà, Marietta, vous avez la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Votre rapport, Madame la Commissaire aux droits de l'homme, fait une large place au droit et à la liberté d'information. Et dans de nombreux États, vous avez souligné que des actes d'intimidation et de représailles, la législation de la censure, et l'engagement d'action en justice sous des prétextes spéciaux fragiliser les journalistes et restreigner la libre circulation d'informations pluralistes. Je souhaite donc, au nom de mon groupe, attirer votre attention sur des mesures qui seraient de nature à appeler l'attention de l'opinion publique sur ces manquements, construire des réponses pratiques, notamment par l'échange sur la façon de garantir la liberté d'information et protéger journalistes, journaux et médias indépendants et lanceurs d'alerte. Sur la question de migration, au terme de l'accord de 2016 de l'Union européenne s'était engagé à verser 6 milliards d'euros pour aider la Turquie. Pouvez-vous nous donner votre position sur les conditions dans lesquelles un tel accord doit préserver à la fois les droits des migrants et les obligations des États à exercer leurs obligations internationales en matière de droit d'asile et faire jouer la solidarité entre États, qu'ils soient membres du Conseil de l'Europe ou non, et prendre donc des initiatives pour une solution durable pour tous. Je veux remercier en tout cas de votre engagement au nom de notre groupe et de votre réponse.
Merci. Marietta, puis-je demander à tous nos collègues dans le futur de rester dans la minute parce qu'on prend du temps des collègues par après. Bon, Madam Commissioner, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. In relation to freedom of speech, safety of journalists, I think my office was very vocal in the past decades, I would say. But when it comes to past year and challenges we are facing because of pandemic, there are many issues that I raised, from the safety of journalists to impunity, to the situation within European Union when it comes to impunity and also attacks on journalists. Recently, we had additional very tragic case of journalists being killed brutally in Greece. So what we thought, at least for the European Union, that is a safe place or safe oasis when it comes to journalist work, it seems this is not, unfortunately, the case any longer. But we need to continue engaging with the member states in order to address issues of restrictions of free speech during COVID pandemic as well. And I'm also engaging with several member states on a dialogue related to freedom of speech and media freedom in order to raise awareness about the importance of this extremely important right for all of us to actually feel free. And that we can freely express our views and that the journalists can continue to scrutinize politicians and public figures. So I can only assure you that this will continue to be so. In relation to migration, I think this is quite complex issue. I'm also in constant contact with the Commission, Commissioner Johansson in particular, on the situation related to the response coming from European Union, including in Turkey, but also, as I mentioned, in the Mediterranean and in many other states, also outside EU, including the Western Balkans. How to find a solution? I think it's a million-dollar question, but what we need to see is actual commitment of the member states of the Council of Europe to see this as a European problem and not just a problem of few countries that are facing most of the challenges. What is missing is solidarity and also willingness of political leaders to try to find a durable, human rights compliant solution. I will continue to raise my voice and to assist in order to see some light at the end of this, I would say, very shameful tunnel in the past decade when it comes to migration and refugee issues in Europe.
Thank you. We now move to the second question, this time on behalf of EPP. I think it is Kamila Gasiuk. Kamila, are you online? You have the floor. 1 minute, please.
Oh, I thought that we have 3 minutes. So, dear Madam, dear Ms. Mijatovic presented a comprehensive report on the activities of the Commissioner last year. And women's rights, in particular, has suffered over several past months. We had to deal not only with a drastic increase in cases of domestic violence, but as Commissioner Mijatovic rightly warns in her report, also with increasingly strong attacks on the Istanbul Convention in Turkey, in Poland. In October 2000, 2020, in the shadow of the second wave of COVID, Polish authorities introduced inhuman, virtually total ban of abortion that forced Polish women to give birth to terminally ill fetuses that will die shortly after delivery. So I have the question, how are you going to cover this subject, to undertake this mentioned by me topic? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner.
If I understood correctly, your question was related to sexual and reproductive health and rights of women in Poland, but also beyond. I covered this in my introduction, but I think when it comes to the work of my office, this is an issue that I raised with the Polish authorities, but also with many other authorities that are in a way backsliding when it comes to these rights. I think it's quite dangerous and quite shameful situation in the 21st century that we still have to remind the authorities how important it is, not only for the well-being of women, but for the well-being of the families, of future generations. So on this, I have a very firm view, and I think it was also covered in this report on access to health prominently. I will continue raising it with the member states when it comes to Poland. I already did this on several occasions, and I will continue to do so.
Thank you. We now move to our next question on behalf of ALDE. Stephanie Crisper, are you online? Okay, Stephanie?
Yes.
You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we see and hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Dear Commissioner, thank you for your strong words, also on the rights of refugees and migrants. You raised the issue on deaths in the Mediterranean Sea, and now we have also serious allegations against Frontex to be involved in illegal pushbacks carried out by European governments. So my question would be, do you see a lack of access to a complaint procedure mechanism? And as a systematic question in general, when it comes to human rights abuses by EU institutions, how could we better guarantee such a possibility to a complaint and hence combat human rights violations effectively? And in this regard, do you support the EU's accession to the ECHR, to the convention? Thank you.
Thank you. I will start with the latest issue. You mentioned, of course, I do support. I think it would be historical. It would be of great importance in relation to all rights. It would be a very strong signal coming from the EU, and I think it would be something that all of us would celebrate. Nevertheless, when it comes to situation with Frontex, I already said I do not have a direct mandate to engage in their procedures and the way they conduct their work, but I do follow also by talking, as I already stated, with the officials in the European Commission in order to see what steps are they planning to do. And recently I learned that they finally decided to employ a person who will actually look at the complaints. Of course, the time will tell how this will be developed, but when it comes to EU, I don't have to tell you this. There are mechanisms, there are tools in order to address these issues, including EU ombudsperson and many other tools that European Commission and European Union has at disposal. Of course, Council of Europe can be of assistance, but in my role as Commissioner, I'm looking at human rights violations, and when it comes to issues related to the Mediterranean, related to the Aegean Sea, and all potential human rights violations at the borders, when it comes to pushbacks and all other issues, as you know, I'm very vocal, and I will continue following it and also working with member states and other international organizations, including UNHCR, that is a very prominent and important partner for us.
Thank you. We'll now move to the next question for the European Conservatives. I think it is Michael Melkoumyan in the room, correct? Michael, you've got the floor.
Monsieur le Président, Madame Commissaire, J'ai eu quelques questions et premièrement, la première question, c'est comment vous évaluez votre activité comme commissaire pendant la dernière année? C'est la première question. Deuxième question, est-ce que c'est suffisant, votre pouvoir, votre fonction, pour assurer l'activité très efficace, pour assurer complètement votre mandat? Pas pourquoi? Parce que je pense qu'il est nécessaire de changer quelques procédures du Conseil de l'Europe. Et troisième question, comment vous pensez? Vous voulez visiter des green zones? Et finalement, je pense qu'il est nécessaire de visiter souvent. Et qu'est-ce que vous voulez et qu'est-ce que vous pouvez? C'est une grande question pour comprendre l'activité, votre activité. Merci pour votre attention.
Commissioner.
Well, when it comes to me assessing my own work, I think I will refrain from this, not because I'm modest, but because I think this is really for you, for others to say. The time will tell. I have 3 more years, and I think it is actually you that scrutinize the work of us because you appointed Commissioner, but also other officials, and of course, civil society will have their say. So on this, I think it's something I will pause on and move to your question in relation to grey zones, which is something that I mentioned to you on many occasions. Of course, as Commissioner for Human Rights, I should have access to all parts of our region, our family of countries that are member states of the Council of Europe. But that's in ideal world, and I know that we do not live in ideal world. In reality, this is extremely difficult. I try to use my powers, my mandate in order to be able to do my human rights work. So my role, the role of the Commissioner, should not be politicized when accessing so-called grey zones or areas of conflict or post-conflict, which is a very difficult task. But there are ways, there are possibilities, and it really depends on member states or all interlocutors that are eager to see Commissioner doing human rights work in grey zones. When it comes to powers, this is, again, something in your hands, in hands of the Committee of Ministers. I think those powers are more than enough. Everything bigger or greater or more aggressive, if I can say so, in my view, would not be of democratic nature. So sometimes it can appear that we cannot do much, but in a way, the engagement from the other side, so from your side, and showing political will to engage with the institutions, to show trust and willingness to change sometimes issues that are part of very sensitive agendas in the society, taboos, dogmas, is already a step forward. So I would say, you know, if you ask me my personal opinion, what we have at a disposal is enough. It is unique in international fora, and I think people that were sitting here, but also in the Committee of Ministers 20 years ago, had wisdom and courage to establish such an institution that, as a current Commissioner, I'm very proud of, but I think you should be proud of the institution that, in a way, you created, and work more with the institution.
Thank you. We will now have the question, the last of the political groups for the United Left, by Violeta Tomic, online. Violeta, you have the floor.
Thank you. Dear Commissioner, in your annual report on the human rights situation, you mentioned Slovenia a few times. You also state that you have sent a letter to the Prime Minister of the Republic of Slovenia, Janez Janša, in relation to press freedom and the founding of Slovenian Press Agency. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister of my country ignores all warnings from the European institutions, which represent the last ray of hope for the citizens of Slovenia for their protection from autocratic regime of the current Slovenian Prime Minister, whom, by the way, most of the Slovenian citizens oppose. I would like to know, Madam Commissioner, what is your opinion on the fact that this person will preside over the EU in the coming period? And also, do you have any strategy to combat the danger of emerging new dictators who love European money but dislike European values? Thank you for your answer.
Perfect timing, Madam Commissioner.
Thank you, Madam Tomic. Of course, I will refrain of commenting on a person. This is not my role nor my job. When it comes to the issues of media freedom in Slovenia, I can say that right now I'm in the process of discussing the issue of SDA that you mentioned, but also public service broadcasting, safety of journalists, with Slovenian government, national human rights structures, journalists, NGOs. I can say that I have very good cooperation from all the interlocutors that I met, and I already had meetings with the Minister of Culture, Minister of Interior, of Justice, including yesterday meeting with President Pahor. So I do hope to be able to come with something of help, of assistance, of memorandum that I'm doing. But apart from that, on the issues of populism, aggressive nationalism, that is very present in our societies, we have to be cautious, we have to be careful, we have to be direct in defending our values, our fundamental values and liberties. What I can see is a lot of toxic environment, hate speech, accusations, insults. I think we all need to ease the tensions, to recognize the challenges, to let democracy lead. And in a way, what Chancellor Merkel said on Monday, a new breath towards Council of Europe and all fundamental rights that are so important, and I would even say sacred, for the well-being of our societies.
Thank you. We will now have 5 questions at once. In order, we will have first Laura Castel, then Claude Kerne, then Petra Bayer, then Hanielka Juhas, and then Ruben Rubinian. We start in the room with Laura Castel. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. Freedom of assembly, independence of the judiciary, human rights defenders, these are all items under your mandate. We were sorry to see, however, little mention of political prisoners nowadays in jail in many countries in the Council of Europe. A continuous silence in front of human rights violations only favors the oppressor. On another note, I wanted to thank you for the letter sent to the Spanish Minister of Justice concerning the amendments to the Criminal Code for decriminalizing defamation and protect freedom of speech. In this forum, we are all parliamentarians who represent thousands of people, and I am sure that you think we deserve protection for the function, I am sure. But in Spain, there are parliamentarians on a prison sentence of 13 years for rebellion and sedition, both in the criminal code. Why was no mention of this in your letter? And are you taking steps in order to address this? Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner, for very valuable work. Thank you.
On passe maintenant au deuxième dans la liste, qui est Claude Kerne. Claude, vous êtes où là? Voilà, Claude, vous avez la parole.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Madame la Commissaire aux droits de l'homme, vous rappelez dans votre rapport que vous avez écrit au Sénat français à propos de la proposition de loi sur la sécurité globale. Je voulais vous informer que le texte finalement adopté intègre de nombreuses modifications apportées par le Sénat. Le Sénat a encadré plus strictement certaines dispositions afin d'assurer une conciliation indispensable avec la protection des libertés publiques et individuelles. Puis vous relevez de manière générale que les principales menaces pour les droits de l'homme sont des problèmes anciens, mais qui ont été amplifiés par la pandémie de Covid-19. Vous soulignez en particulier l'érosion inquiétante de l'état de droit dans nombre d'États membres. Comment comptez-vous agir pour contrer ces tendances négatives? Merci.
Merci, Claude. We now go to our next on the list, which is Petra Bayer. Petra, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much. Last week we debated about and voted on Suna Everstodir's reports on the situation of the Crimean Tatars, and you mentioned the obstacles you have to monitor human rights situation at the Crimea. What must happen that a very well-performed human rights evaluation and monitoring can be performed at the Crimea? And my second question is on the Istanbul Convention, which at the moment is misused as an object of a proxy dispute about values, ignoring what is its content, namely combating violence against women and domestic violence and nothing else. Do you have hope that those who do not want to understand what the content of the Istanbul Convention is will ever do so? And what are your next steps to promote sexual and reproductive health and rights in general?
Thank you, Petra. We now go to number 4 on my list, which is Hanielka Juhasz. Hanielka, are you online? I see something coming.
Dear Madam Commissioner, within the framework of the Council of Europe, two remarkable legal instruments have been adopted to address the issue of national linguistic minorities: the Framework Convention on the Protection of National Minorities and also the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages. On Monday, this Assembly adopted a resolution and recommendation with the title Preserving National Minorities in Europe. This is a truly important topic that is deserving greater attention. In your 2019 annual report, you dedicated a single subchapter to the right of national minorities. However, you omitted this highly significant topic from your current 2020 annual report. Given the strong legal background laid out above, along with the sharp decline in national minority rights in some member states, why did you choose to ignore this topic in your recent activity report? Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Anelka. We now come to our last in this list, who is Ruben Rubinian. I think he is in the room. Ruben, you have the floor.
Madam Commissioner, last October, during the Nagorno-Karabakh war, you expressed your serious concern for the threat to human rights. After the ceasefire, you have constantly been informed about the devastating post-war situation on ground and the equally alarming condition of Armenian prisoners of war. Upon your election as Commissioner, you stated that the system of human rights protection in Europe is one of the most advanced in the world. So please tell me, what is keeping you back from visiting and witnessing the human rights situation of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh? Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben. Madam Commissioner, for the 5 questions.
Thank you. Just as a remark, maybe to all distinguished parliamentarians that took floor, the fact that I'm sometimes appear to be silent because there are no public statements doesn't mean that I'm not engaging. On the contrary, I do engage, and I know that many of you are asking me on many occasions, particularly when it comes to your countries, to remain silent and to use quiet diplomacy, which is relevant, and I think it's extremely important. When it comes to other countries that you disagree with, then you are asking me for my public statements, which is also fine. It's good to hear different ways of how I should perform my mandate. At the same time, I can assure you that I do follow as much as I can, and I also look at the priorities. I have particular careful assessments on human rights situation in member states. And then I decide, based on my assessments, in order to react publicly using social media or engaging with the authorities, sending letters. So I do use certain ways of dealing with it based on my mandate. Nevertheless, In order to try to reply directly to Mrs. Castel, yes, I did send a letter, and letter was related to freedom of assembly. I think this is an issue I followed for quite some time in Spain, also engaging with the authorities before this letter was sent, but also, as you know, I received quite a substantive, comprehensive and constructive reply from your minister. When it comes to many other issues, including prisoners, this is something I'm closely monitoring, closely following, engaging with the authorities, with civil society. Also, in the process of discussions, I met President of Catalan Parliament and discussed many of the issues, ombudsperson. So this is not just me, deciding overnight to make a public statement to please anybody or to do something of political nature. It is a careful assessment, and you have to trust me on this. This is not something I do without really trying to be as factual as possible, listening to all the voices and making sure that my response, my assistance, my voice is not going to be manipulated in completely different nature. So I will for sure continue to do so and to continue my very constructive engagement with the Spanish government. And I agree with you, it's very sensitive, it's very important, and I will not neglect it, but the time will come also when I raise all issues of concern. The French law, as you know, I was vocal on this, and I called for particular issues related to freedom of expression. How do I intend to address the challenges? I think I already answered this question on how I intend to do so, using my mandate, using all possible means, even sometimes stretching my mandate in order to address issues that I think are important for human rights in Europe. Petra Bayer, I had very good meeting with Crimean Tatars, as I said, including all three representatives, very distinguished representatives of Tatar Mejlis. We had extensive talks and discussed how I can be of help, assistance. We are already in touch after my visit in order to do so. When it comes to monitoring, there are many challenges. Also for the UN mission that is present and deployed with 60 plus people in Ukraine territory, it is very challenging to do so. Nevertheless, I'm in contact with many lawyers defending people in Crimea and Simferopol, with many activists, journalists, also in the eastern Ukraine, and we will try to engage as much as we can. Of course, I would be happiest if tomorrow I can really go to Crimea, if I can go to prisons in order to see people, in order to really try to assist and first of all do my human rights work and nothing else. But we will continue doing so, and as I said, in the last 3 years I've been trying very hard. But at the moment I do not see this is possible. Istanbul Convention, it's not just me, I think it's all of us in the Council of Europe, including Secretary General, who has a very firm stance on this, different monitoring bodies, different institutions that are dealing with this. I think it is also important to say that I work also closely with Commissioner Dalli on the issues of women's rights. If people who do not believe are going to believe, I do not know. This is not the only topic. We have different views on different issues, and it should remain so because we want plurality. We should also hear voices that we disagree with. But any voices of any political nature should not be stopping progress of our societies and well-being and human rights of people. So it's a tricky issue, but I think it's of extreme importance. I can only say that I will continue to work with all of you, with the representatives of your countries, with civil society, many women's organizations, NGOs that I met in many of our member states that are calling themselves democratic states, where women's rights and sexual and reproductive rights are under great danger. National minority, why do I ignore it? I can hardly agree with this. I do not ignore it. I do not ignore any of the rights, but it is sometimes impossible to put everything in the report. I just said that I've been to Ukraine and I address issues of minority rights and language laws. So that is hardly, that can hardly be called ignoring it. Of course, not everything can be in the report at the same time, but we do work also, as you mentioned, with the Framework Convention, with the Language Charter, with other international organizations. I recently met with the High Commissioner for National Minorities, Kairat Abdrakhmanov, in order to discuss these particular issues, and we will continue to do so.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. You still have, I think, some answers there.
Was it? I think so.
Okay. Problem is that we are 1 minute.
If I'm wrong, you know.
No. We're 1 minute before 5, so I cannot get 5 more. I cannot get 5 more questions out. I can get one. Point of order.
Sorry.
You
it's
see.
my mistake. Sorry.
See,
I apologize. It's not because I didn't want, but it's very important. Sorry, because there were many questions. I'm used to 3 by 3, so I think it was on another page. Why do I mean, the main issue was related to the fact that I cannot go to Nagorno-Karabakh. Nobody can go to Nagorno-Karabakh at the moment. And it is something that I think is quite unfortunate. I think we should all be able, and when I say we, I think of international organizations. I do follow everything related to trilateral agreement and also a need for UNHCR to engage. We work with colleagues and we try to do as much as possible in order to be able to travel, not only to Nagorno-Karabakh only, but to cover all human rights issues that are so important now in this time where we could only, at least that would be my wish, to engage on reconciliation, on truth, to ease the tensions. And I can say that in both countries, in Azerbaijan, in Armenia, the narrative, the rhetoric is not helping. It is difficult, it is extremely sensitive, it is painful at the same time. Lives are lost, children are killed, families are displaced. But now, when the agreement has been signed, we need to move forward. I can only say that I am willing to travel anytime with my team in order to be of help. I tried several times and it did not work, without going into details now. It doesn't mean I will not continue to do so. It is important. We have the responsibility at the Council of Europe. My office also has a legacy when it comes to work in post-conflict areas. Your colleague, parliamentarian, my dear friend, former Commissioner for Human Rights, Thomas Hammerberg, is known as a hero of these processes. So at least this legacy should be used by member states facing these challenges in order to allow us working on human rights issues to go and to reach out to people, to listen to their stories, to their sufferings. And on all sides, there are people suffering. So this is my message, to not only to, as a reply to you, Mr. Rubinian, but to both countries. We need to move forward.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. My little hunch was there, so I Thank you for responding to all the questions. I do apologize to all our colleagues who cannot put their question, but this 1 hour during this session seems to be really not enough. I mean, I've got like more than 30 left for you. I had 70 left for Merkel. I had 50 left for Sassoli. Oh la la. We'll try to figure out a way to do better. But anyway, thank you very much for having been here. And obviously, you are available for all the colleagues who wish to reach out to you. Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank
and
you
we will
all.
now, thank you very much, and we will now move to the next point. Kimmo will take over because I've got my number, I don't know how many, of bilaterals during this part session. Kimmo, thank you very much for taking over.
Dear colleagues, thanks, Rick, for your leading the session up to this moment. I try to do my best to lead the session up to the end, I suppose, today, isn't it so that there will be 2 different major items for us to discuss: long-term chronic illnesses and also the issue of Montenegro, if I recall it exactly how the afternoon will continue. But before going to the issues of the real agenda, I understand that Mrs. Kasimati wishes to make a personal statement. I remind the Assembly that no debate may arise concerning this type of personal statements, but she do have the right to do that one. And now, Mrs. Kasimati, the personal statement, you have the floor, but only 2 minutes for the personal statement. Please. Excellent, that's good, that's important.
Release your micro, Mrs. Kasimati, we cannot hear you.
And there's a beautiful, I suppose, Greek flag behind you, isn't it?
Okay. Thank you, Honorable Mr. President, Vice Presidents, Madam Secretary General and Commissioner for Human Rights. As a member of the Greek delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, I would like to make a statement to commemorate that 54 years ago this day, in 21st of April 1967, a foreign-led junta was imposed in Greece, abrogating democracy, dismantling human rights and the rule of law, and ended 7 years later with the Turkish invasion and the ongoing until today occupation of Cyprus having fulfilled its raison d'etre. During that time, along with the political and geopolitical patronizing of Greece under dictatorship, despicable and dehumanizing tortures were being perpetrated by the neo-fascists against those who resisted. We owe eternal gratitude to those who fought and even gave their lives for this just cause. Also, to the people in Europe and elsewhere in the world who stood actively by Greek people and supported the resistance groups. We hold dear this solidarity in our hearts. We always remember, of course, and praise the Council of Europe for substantiating through its procedures the tortures, and then for taking the decision in 1969 to abort the dictatorial regime from this organization, thus upholding its statutory principles and values with acts, not just words. An example of wise leadership to be followed nowadays by the actors of the international community. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Kasimati. These type of personal statements are obviously personal statements in the way that we don't allow any debate. We will move on now to the issue where we have a debate, and the next item for us is discrimination against persons dealing with chronic and long-term illnesses. There's a report produced by Committee of Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development, and presented, and report is prepared by Mrs. Martina. She will have soon a statement on this one and introduce a report. We shall also hear an opinion from Mrs. Beatrice Fresco-Rolfo on behalf of the Committee for Equality and Non-Discrimination. The debate must finish at 6:40, so I maybe have to interrupt, like we have done already earlier very many times, the list of speakers. Around 6:30 I will try to see it so that if there are certain issues just coming up, that I allow that, but around 6:30 I will stop it in order to allow the replies and also the votes. The rapporteur has 7 minutes to present the case, the report itself, and further speakers, all of them, have 3 minutes to reply on the debate. So, Mrs. Vonne, you can now have your statement, please. Mrs. Vonne, introduce the report for us. I understood that you are not here in the hall. Please, the floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je suis très heureuse d'être aujourd'hui avec vous pour vous présenter ce rapport de la plus grande importance. Merci, et Mesdames et Messieurs les parlementaires, chacun de nous a dans notre entourage immédiat un parent, une amie, un proche ou une collègue dont la vie a été bouleversée par la maladie chronique ou de longue durée. Il s'agit des insuffisances cardiaques graves comme la maladie d'Alzheimer, la maladie de Parkinson, la mucoviscidose, la maladie de Crohn évolutive ou encore la sclérose en plaques. Toutes les 15 secondes, une femme se fait dépister un cancer du sein quelque part dans le monde. Quelques 60 millions de personnes subissent le diabète en Europe et selon l'Organisation mondiale de la santé, environ 9,6% des femmes et 10,3% des hommes âgés de 25 ans et plus en souffrent. Ces maladies abîment la qualité de vie. Une femme sur 10 souffre d'endométriose. 80% des femmes atteintes de cette maladie ressentent des limitations dans leurs tâches quotidiennes et 40% ont des troubles de la fertilité. Ces maladies nécessitent parfois des traitements à vie. Si certaines sont guéries, leurs effets peuvent continuer à peser sur les individus. Et je pense entre autres à la Covid-19, dont les conséquences sont aujourd'hui encore peu connues. Je pense aussi aux personnes qui ont survécu au cancer. En lien avec ma profession, avant de devenir parlementaire, je suis psychiatre, j'ai ajouté ici dans ce rapport les maladies psychiatriques. Et 6% des adultes ont présenté récemment des symptômes dépressifs dans l'Union européenne. Ces maladies sont très sérieuses. Elles sont les principales causes de mortalité prématurée. Elles altèrent la vie d'au moins un tiers de la population européenne. Elles sont plus fréquentes chez les femmes que chez les hommes. Elles sont effrayantes quand elles touchent les enfants. Nos populations vieillissent et le nombre de maladies chroniques augmente. Elles s'additionnent et aggravent la morbidité. À cause du vieillissement de la population, mais aussi sous les effets conjugués de la pauvreté, de la pollution, du réchauffement climatique et maintenant, partout dans le monde, de la Covid-19. En raison de leurs effets directs et indirects, ces maladies nuisent à la pleine et égale jouissance de tous les droits humains et de toutes les libertés fondamentales. La définition de l'OMS de la santé doit être « nos compas, nos repères ». La bonne santé est un état de complet bien-être physique, mental et social. Il ne consiste pas seulement en une absence de maladie ou d'infirmité. À mon sens, toutes ces maladies entrent dans le champ de la Convention des Nations Unies relative aux droits des personnes handicapées, la CDPH. Par conséquent, elles impliquent forcément des obligations de la part de l'État, de tous les États, mais aussi des employeurs du secteur privé. Ces maladies sont des obstacles au bien-être. Par conséquent, ce n'est pas à ces personnes de s'adapter à la société, mais bien à la société à s'adapter à ces personnes qui présentent des maladies chroniques. Aussi, j'invite les États à poursuivre leurs efforts dans la lutte contre l'exclusion et garantir un accès universel à la santé. Nous avons besoin d'emporter toute la société contre ces maladies. Nous devons aussi lutter contre l'errance diagnostique et tout ce qui nous éloigne de l'approche proposée par la CDPH. À travers ce projet de résolution, je souhaite que les États renforcent les capacités de dépistage et de prévention, allouent des moyens et des crédits suffisants et soient capables de sanctionner les entraves à la dignité, au bien-être et à l'épanouissement individuel des malades. Je fais aussi le vœu que l'approche de la CDPH diffuse dans toute la société, en particulier le secteur privé. Il n'est pas normal que des individus se voient reprocher leur statut de malade au travail ou ailleurs. C'est une double peine. Je ne suis pas sûre, sauf à évaluer son application, que le droit à l'oubli qui est accordé aux personnes après 10 ans de convalescence soit à la hauteur des espoirs qu'il a suscités. C'est à nous, parlementaires, d'être des acteurs du changement dans nos parlements et je vous invite tous et tous à promouvoir ces principes contenus dans la CDPH, y compris quand ils concernent les malades chroniques et de longue durée. Nous l'avons entendu pendant l'audition en septembre dernier, des maladies chroniques ont subi plus que les autres la pandémie de Covid-19. Ce n'est pas acceptable. Les services de santé doivent pouvoir répondre à l'imprévu tout en étant attentifs aux évolutions de la société et en révisant toutes les réglementations. J'invite enfin devant vous le Liechtenstein à adhérer à la CDPH afin qu'aucun pays européen ne reste en dehors. Ce cadre est adapté aux besoins exprimés par les personnes qui se heurtent à des obstacles dans leur environnement social et physique immédiat. Je tiens à remercier tout de suite en introduction Madame Fresco-Rolfo qui a travaillé sur ce rapport et qui va vous livrer maintenant son avis par rapport à cette proposition de résolution. Je vous remercie.
Oh, Madame Bonner, merci beaucoup pour votre présentation. Le prochain, Madame Beatrice Fresco-Rolfo, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je tiens tout d'abord à féliciter la rapporteure pour la qualité de son rapport qui est très complet et qui apporte un éclairage sur les maladies chroniques et leur impact à long terme. Chers collègues, nous parlons aujourd'hui d'enfants, de femmes, d'hommes qui ont déjà une bataille difficile à livrer, celle contre la maladie. Ils doivent pouvoir trouver soutien et protection dans les sociétés auxquelles ils appartiennent et ne pas avoir à subir une double peine avec une possible marginalisation. Le sujet de la discrimination était au cœur du dépôt de cette proposition de résolution et c'est bien pour enrichir le rapport en ce sens que la Commission sur l'égalité et la non-discrimination a présenté 8 amendements qui ont trouvé un écho favorable auprès des membres de la Commission sociale et de la rapporteure. Au moyen de cet avis, j'ai souhaité apporter quelques informations supplémentaires sur les obstacles que devront surmonter les malades pendant et après leur traitement médical. Imaginez la difficulté pour trouver un emploi. Comment expliquer l'absence d'activité sur un curriculum vitae? Exposer sa maladie peut-il être perçu comme une faiblesse? Ne rien dire, un aveu de culpabilité. J'ai bien dit culpabilité, coupable d'avoir été malade. Tel est le sentiment de ces personnes en souffrance. Imaginez la difficulté rencontrée par les malades lors d'un retour au travail après un congé maladie. L'aménagement du poste de travail est-il possible? Des horaires adaptés peuvent-ils être négociés? L'employeur peut-il comprendre et accepter que tout ne soit pas comme avant? Or, il a été confirmé par Mme Lise Egan de l'organisation Macmillan Cancer Support, le fait de continuer à travailler apporte un sentiment de normalité, une motivation dans la vie et une source de revenus. Sachez qu'une personne sur 5 ayant repris le travail subit une certaine forme de discrimination. Venons-en à un autre sujet, crucial lorsque l'on parle de discrimination. Chacun de nous connaît une personne qui a eu des difficultés pour obtenir un emprunt bancaire ou une assurance au motif de sa maladie. Comment lui refuser de pouvoir se projeter dans l'avenir, d'avoir des projets pour elle, pour lui, pour sa famille? Le droit à l'oubli en matière d'assurance a été introduit par 4 pays, la France, la Belgique, le Luxembourg et les Pays-Bas. C'est une notion récente qui permet de ne pas avoir à déclarer une maladie guérie depuis quelques années, même si le nombre de maladies offrant cette possibilité reste limité. Nous devons encourager l'application du droit à l'oubli dans nos pays membres afin de donner à tous la possibilité de réaliser leurs rêves. Prenons conscience que là où la maladie prend toute la place, le développement personnel et professionnel est freiné. Les législatrices et les législateurs ne devraient plus attendre pour se saisir de cette question. Le rayonnement d'un pays passe par la façon dont il traite les plus fragiles. C'est pourquoi, chers collègues, je vous engage à voter favorablement pour ce rapport.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Fresco-Roffo. And now we will move to the discussion, real debate in terms of the speakers list. And as usual, we start with the political groups. The first one is from ALDE Group, Mr. Kusti Gras from Luxembourg, please. Is the connection there? It is. Okay.
Monsieur le Président, vous m'entendez? Do you hear me?
We hear you.
Okay, but you can't see me. Voilà, maintenant c'est...
Also see you,
Merci,
s'il vous
Monsieur
plaît.
le Président. Oui. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Après ces petits problèmes techniques, chers collègues, en dépit de la grave crise sanitaire que le monde traverse actuellement, nous ne devons pas ignorer d'autres problèmes liés à la santé, en premier lieu, évidemment, le phénomène des maladies chroniques et de longue durée. Ces maladies ne sont d'ailleurs pas le résultat d'un choix conscient, tout comme une personne ne choisit pas un handicap. Chacun a droit à une vie autodéterminée, lui permettant de participer à la société sous tous ses aspects. Cela vaut surtout pour les personnes souffrant de maladies chroniques. Malgré de nombreux efforts déployés, la discrimination à l'égard des concernés est encore omniprésente. Ils ne bénéficient pas toujours des mêmes opportunités d'éducation, leur accès aux services médicaux est souvent limité et la participation au marché du travail leur est rendue plus difficile. Il importe de renvoyer dans ce contexte la Convention des Nations Unies relative aux droits des personnes handicapées de 2006. Cette convention a entre autres donc pour objet de promouvoir la pleine jouissance de tous les droits de l'homme et de toutes les libertés fondamentales par les personnes handicapées. Monsieur le Président, même s'il existe encore des pays qui nient l'existence de ces maladies, d'ailleurs un fait inadmissible, d'autres font de sérieux efforts afin d'améliorer la vie des personnes concernées. Il s'agit avant tout donc de sensibiliser l'ensemble de la société et de combattre les stéréotypes, les préjugés et les pratiques dangereuses. De surcroît, le groupe ALDE estime qu'il est important d'encourager les médias à s'occuper davantage de cette problématique. Certains pays ont élaboré des plans nationaux sur les maladies de longue durée. On ne peut que les en féliciter. Une aide à l'inclusion dans l'emploi pour soutenir les personnes frappées de cette maladie est pour mon groupe un autre élément important. Nous invitons les pays membres également à garantir aux personnes concernées par une base légale l'accessibilité dans les lieux publics ainsi que dans les bâtiments d'habitation collective. On peut aussi contribuer de manière importante à faire éliminer les barrières sociales et à rendre la vie publique accessible à tous. Quelques États, dont mon pays, le Luxembourg, ont signé une convention avec des compagnies d'assurance et de réassurance pour introduire le droit à l'oubli, permettant principalement aux malades guéris d'accéder à l'assurance solde restant due d'un crédit immobilier. Partant, notre appel aux États plus réticents en cette matière, n'hésitez pas à réaliser également cet objectif. Le groupe ALDE est conscient qu'il reste encore beaucoup à faire, notamment dans le domaine de la reconnaissance des maladies chroniques et du remboursement des frais inhérents par la caisse d'assurance maladie. Finalement, il me tient à cœur à féliciter au nom de mon groupe Madame Martine Vonner pour son excellent rapport. Il va de soi que le groupe ALDE va également soutenir la recommandation afférente. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Now, after three important presentations from Francophone Europe, we will move to Anglo-Saxon Europe. Let's put in those terms, United Kingdom, Mr. John Howell, representing a group EC. Please, John.
Very much, Mr. President. I hadn't quite seen myself as the champion of Anglo-Saxon Europe, but there we are. I would like to thank the rapporteurs for their reports on this. They raised some very important points. And the importance of this is firstly in what they do to link chronic and long-term illness with premature mortality. That is a very important point. But the second point is that they do mention throughout their reports is the effect that this has on lives and on the quality of life of the people who suffer from these diseases. Because the report stresses the human side, and for example, it stresses the role of dignity and the human rights of individuals who suffer from long-term illnesses. And I think that's as it should be. Of course, at the moment, this has been made even more relevant because of those who are suffering from long-term COVID. And we have a number of people who are suffering from that in the UK. And I do think that a way has to be found to help to deal with this over the long term. The report stresses the need for patients to work with NGOs, and of course, in many countries, this is exactly what happens. It happens in my own country, for example, and I do welcome that. The report mentions those with breast cancer, and I have some experience of that. Not personally, but with a partner who has suffered from breast cancer. And it's not just about providing frequent checks and care. It's the encouragement of them to go back into the world, to enjoy life to the full. And I do think that is a very important point. And what can help in achieving this are the practical steps that they need to get back into finding out how to enjoy themselves and how to be a great part of our lives. There has, of course, over the years been marked developments in better treatment, and I think I would definitely like to encourage that to continue. I spoke to somebody who suffers from multiple sclerosis, who said that in his experience, and he plays a very prominent part in the UK society, that he has not experienced any discrimination. And I think that is to be applauded. And I'm also aware of work that was undertaken a couple of years ago now in Canada to deal with these problems. And I think that the rapporteurs may wish to have a look at that to see the comparisons that they can make between that and what was recommended in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Howell. You didn't particularly like to represent Anglo-Saxon Europe. That's fair. Now, anyhow, we are having a Nordic representation. Mr. Olafur Gunnarsson from Iceland, and obviously he will represent particularly in this case, United European Left. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. I hope you can hear me.
Can hear you, and we can see you.
I would like to thank Ms. Martine Vonner for her timely report on an important issue. Equal access to healthcare is a basic human right, and our societies should do their utmost to ensure that this right is respected. Discrimination in any form, be it in the form of access to care or access to the various means society has to offer, should be abolished. Discrimination against persons with chronic conditions is a societal decision, and it is society's task to end this discrimination. In my work as a geriatrician, I battle discrimination and belittlement on behalf of my patients on a daily basis. Access to healthcare on the basis of universal healthcare funded by our taxes is extremely important. By ensuring universal access, the debate goes from whether to provide for care to how we should provide it and how we as a society should fund it. By deciding that healthcare is a basic human right, we take away a barrier society has raised. We must address the culture of discrimination. Discrimination hits our weakest members of society the hardest, often at a time in our life when we are at the most vulnerable. This is wrong, and only a concerted effort by all our societies can make this right. We must deal with the culture of grouping diseases as more or less important. Chronic conditions and long-term illnesses are not personal choices, and society should not allow itself to project that feeling to those who fall ill. This becomes particularly important at times like the current ones when millions of individuals may have chronic and long-term consequences of the pandemic. We have accepted discriminations against older people. We have accepted that many of them have lesser access to healthcare, and we find it in order to decide that they are lesser members of our societies. This must stop. We must strengthen the welfare fabric of our societies. This includes access to services, healthcare, and participation in pension system, also by those that may have a shorter time span in the workforce or not able to join the workforce at all. We must also work to strengthen labor unions and labor contracts at all levels of society. Thereby, we will ensure that those who fall ill temporarily or long-term enjoy benefits in spite of the fact that they are not, or to a lesser extent, a part of the workforce. Our laws need to reflect this, but more so, our societies have to accept that discrimination is no longer an option open for debate, but rather an infringement on basic human rights. Our societies need to diversify. We will never achieve a state of perfection, neither on a personal nor on societal basis. We should embrace diversity. We should embrace the fact that some of us are different, and society should ensure that all of us are included and allowed to strive for happiness in harmony with society and based on our strengths and wants as individuals and welcome members of society. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gunnarsson. Le prochain, le groupe des socialistes, Madame Mariette Karamanli, France, s'il vous plaît.
Merci. Tout d'abord, je tenais vraiment à saluer et remercier les deux co-rapporteurs, à la fois Madame Bonner pour son excellent rapport et puis notre rapporteur aussi pour avis sur les maladies chroniques et de longue durée. Je voulais faire au nom de mon groupe 3 observations. D'abord, la première concerne l'importance des maladies chroniques et de longue durée. Et si elles sont cause de mortalité générale et prématurée, elles sont aussi la contrepartie de l'allongement de la durée de vie, notamment en Europe. Pour ne prendre que la situation de la France, un tiers de nos concitoyens auront plus de 60 ans en 2050, contre 1/5 en 2015. L'enjeu donc est bien celui d'une espérance de vie en bonne santé et en autonomie. Et si l'espérance de vie est un progrès, nous devons aussi apprendre à mieux lutter contre les maladies dégénératives et évidemment les maladies environnementales. Ma deuxième observation porte sur les moyens de prévenir ces situations trop souvent sources de discrimination et vécues comme discriminatoires. En premier, donc, nous devons rappeler la nécessité de faire de la santé un axe prioritaire de la recherche publique et privée. Évidemment, la recherche fondamentale et indispensable sans limite de champ et non programmable dans des entendus trop limités. Donc, il faut y ajouter la recherche expérimentale, la recherche clinique, mais aussi la recherche par et dans les sciences humaines et sociales. Et cette dernière vise justement à améliorer la qualité de vie des personnes, l'interface entre les patients et la société, et évidemment la prise en compte des besoins des patients. À côté de l'approfondissement donc de la connaissance, nous devons aussi mettre l'accent sur le dépistage précoce et l'accompagnement des personnes. Ma dernière donc observation porte plutôt sur les mesures de nature à prévenir et diminuer les discriminations. Et parmi elles figurent le droit à la formation initiale et continue, l'adaptation à l'emploi et l'accès aux services financiers comme au crédit, aux assurances, que ça a été rappelé tout à l'heure, et le droit à la compensation de la perte d'autonomie, qu'elle soit partielle ou complète, temporaire ou durable. Alors l'enquête menée par la rapporteure et les services de notre Assemblée montrent des fondements différents, des prestations et des législations diverses. Je suggère donc, au nom de mon groupe, que les travaux puissent être continués pour enrichir la connaissance, mais surtout définir des objectifs convergents et partager de bonnes pratiques. Il faut aussi faire émerger des initiatives nouvelles et innovantes et demander également aux États de porter des appels à projets ou manifestations d'intérêt dans tous les domaines de la vie des personnes concernées. Nous pensons qu'il faut donner la parole et faire aussi des personnes atteintes des parties prenantes des politiques à mettre en œuvre. Donc, mon groupe soutiendra la résolution qui est présentée par notre rapporteur et nous souhaitons qu'elle puisse être poursuivie. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Carbandli, pour votre présentation. Le prochain est le groupe EPP et Madame Laurence Trastour-Isnat de France, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, chers collègues. Permettez-moi tout d'abord, au nom du groupe PPE, de féliciter notre collègue rapporteure, Madame Martine Vonner, pour son excellent rapport, et de remercier également Madame la rapporteure pour avis, Béatrice Fresco-Rolfo, pour ses ajouts très pertinents. La discrimination à l'égard des personnes atteintes de maladies chroniques et de longue durée est un problème grave et préoccupant, inacceptable au XXIe siècle. Ces maladies touchent un tiers de la population et provoquent une morbidité en hausse en raison du vieillissement de notre continent. S'additionnent à ce premier paramètre les effets de la pauvreté, de la pollution et du réchauffement climatique. Par ailleurs, les effets qui affectent durablement les personnes qui en souffrent, ces maladies nuisent à une pleine jouissance de tous ces droits humains et de la liberté fondamentale. La réponse à y apporter doit être globale. Comment accepter que ces maladies soient parfois mal connues des professionnels de santé ? Comment accepter, par exemple, que certaines femmes atteintes de l'endométriose, maladie dont souffre une femme sur 10 et qui limite 80% d'entre elles dans leurs tâches quotidiennes, recourent à des stratégies pour cacher leur maladie dans leur travail ? Comment tolérer l'errance du diagnostic qui fait perdre des chances de traitement, voire même de guérison pour tant de patients ? Cette situation nous oblige collectivement. Il faut mettre un terme à la double peine que constitue la maladie et les obstacles financiers et sociaux qui en suivent. Il faut autoriser, dans le cas d'un emprunt, par exemple, à ne pas mentionner la pathologie. Chacun doit pouvoir vivre en se construisant un avenir et en se protégeant, sans qu'on lui rappelle constamment qu'il est malade. Je crois que notre Assemblée a raison de se saisir de ce sujet. La réponse sera collective, en assurant des campagnes de sensibilisation de grande ampleur sur les maladies chroniques et les maladies de longue durée, en fournissant des informations visibles et accessibles auprès de tous. Le droit à la vie n'est pas un simple principe, c'est une réalité qui doit prendre corps dans nos politiques de santé, afin d'assurer à tous une pleine jouissance des droits. J'ai la conviction que le Conseil de l'Europe peut agir avec l'ensemble des États membres. Je forme donc le vœu que nous agissions pour inciter nos gouvernants à coopérer davantage dans la lutte contre les maladies chroniques et de longue durée, mais également face à la discrimination dont ces personnes atteintes font l'objet. Cette discrimination, c'est le triomphe d'une injustice qui ne dit pas son nom. La victoire, c'est d'œuvrer ensemble afin de rétablir une égalité entre l'ensemble de ces malades.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Trastour-Isnat. Now we will go to the real speakers list, because now we have had the speakers on behalf of the political groups. I calculated that there have been researched 21, 20 exactly, people have announced their interest for speakers list, and if we are now sharp in terms of the 3 minutes, I try to do it so that we all, those 20 people, can make their statements. So we will start now with Spain. Pustindu Maria Luisa. Maria Luisa Pustindu, please, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias, presidente. Y en primer lugar quisiera felicitar a las ponentes por este extraordinario report. La verdad es que me siento muy satisfecha de participar en este debate tan importante porque afecta a muchos ciudadanos y ciudadanas europeos que quedan en el ángulo muerto de los derechos de estas personas. Y coincidiendo con lo que se ha venido planteando, debemos insistir en la posibilidad de trabajar en la prevención, que cuanto más precoz sea mejor. Sin embargo, una vez que la enfermedad aparece, empieza un calvario, hasta dar con un diagnóstico certero que una vez que se consigue, la persona diagnosticada con una enfermedad crónica se tiene que enfrentar a una nueva situación en la que tiene que afrontar la vida de una manera diferente. Porque el padecer una enfermedad crónica no solo le va a afectar en lo físico, sino también en lo emocional, en lo social y a veces incluso en el ámbito laboral y por tanto también en el económico. Por tanto, hay que trabajar en la ayuda para esa aceptación y para la adaptación a esa nueva realidad que para el paciente requiere un tiempo, pero que deben aprender nuevas a convivir con su enfermedad y a buscar también y aceptar el apoyo de los demás y sobre todo a participar activamente en el cuidado de su salud. Cuando estas cosas se cumplen, normalmente pues el éxito en el proceso del afrontamiento de la enfermedad está más garantizado. Porque lo que está claro es que las enfermedades crónicas son problemas de salud de larga duración. La palabra crónico proviene del término griego cronos, que significa tiempo, y aunque el hecho de padecer un trastorno crónico no implica necesariamente tener una enfermedad que lleve pronto a poner en peligro la vida, aunque algunas sí, es importante ser consciente de que se tiene y que hay que estar alerta en el sentido de que no equivocarse con que puedan desaparecer síntomas por estar con un buen tratamiento, pero sin que la enfermedad desaparezca. En el caso de los menores la cosa se complica más, empezando por la aceptación de los padres, que además deben educar a sus hijos a aprender a conocerse a sí mismos y a convivir con la enfermedad con la mayor normalidad posible. Y tampoco debemos olvidar que en algunos casos deben tener necesidades educativas especiales que deben ser atendidas también por las administraciones competentes. Para nosotros, la importancia de esta moción radica en el necesario compromiso de esta Asamblea Parlamentaria, que en este asunto debe ser reforzado, sobre todo en estos momentos en los que comprobamos cada día cómo está creciendo de manera exponencial el número de personas afectadas por problemas de enfermedad crónica o secuelas derivados de haber padecido el COVID-19. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Madame Bustinou. Le prochain, Madame Frédéric Reiss, France. Monsieur Frédéric Reiss, France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Chers collègues, Madame la rapporteure, chère Martine Vonner, je tiens tout d'abord à vous remercier pour ce travail qui a notamment le mérite d'attirer notre attention sur une situation relativement peu prise en compte dans les politiques publiques alors qu'elle touche un tiers de la population européenne. Vous le rappelez, les maladies chroniques et de longue durée sont les principales causes de mortalité et constituent des obstacles à la dignité, au bien-être et à l'épanouissement individuel des malades, ce qui est évidemment inacceptable. Avec la ratification de la Convention des Nations Unies relative aux droits des personnes handicapées, les États membres du Conseil de l'Europe ont pris des engagements en matière de lutte contre les désavantages sociaux touchant les malades. La PCE invite tous les États membres à renforcer leurs mesures nationales destinées à lutter contre l'exclusion des personnes atteintes de maladies chroniques ou de longue durée. Je ne peux que souscrire à cette invitation. L'État n'a pas vocation à tout organiser, mais la mise en place d'un environnement protecteur pour les populations vulnérables relève sans nul doute de ses obligations. Le maintien ou le retour dans le monde du travail devrait être un droit et une réalité pour tous les malades. Travailler contribue au bien-être financier et psychologique des individus. Être privé de travail constitue une stigmatisation sociale injustifiable. De même, le droit à l'oubli, beaucoup en ont parlé, c'est-à-dire le droit de ne pas avoir à mentionner indéfiniment sa maladie auprès de certains acteurs, comme par exemple les banques dans le cadre d'une demande de prêt, devrait être généralisé car il est anormal et même inhumain qu'une personne soit privée de toute perspective d'avenir. Je souhaite insister sur un point que vous évoquez dans votre rapport, à savoir l'impact de la pandémie de Covid-19 sur la situation des personnes atteintes de maladies chroniques et de longue durée. La pandémie déstabilise le quotidien de tout un chacun, mais comme vous l'indiquez dans votre travail, elle touche singulièrement les malades. Les difficultés auxquelles les malades sont confrontés du fait de la pandémie sont malheureusement multiples. Parmi elles, la déprogrammation des diagnostics et de soins me semble particulièrement grave, car non seulement elle peut aboutir à une perte de chance intolérable, mais elle nourrit de plus un fort sentiment d'injustice et même de colère dans les cas les plus dramatiques. Il me semble impératif de sensibiliser tous les responsables politiques à ce risque. Ne pas le faire pèserait très lourdement sur les capacités de redressement de la société et compromettrait dangereusement l'avenir. J'invite tous à voter en faveur de cette résolution. Je vous remercie.
Monsieur Reis, merci beaucoup. И следующая это мадам госпожа Конул Нурлиева из Азербайджана. Пожалуйста. Ну? Нету? Никакие we don't have any contacts. No. You might have later on if she comes. Она там? Окей, пожалуйста. Супер.
Thank you. Honorable chairs and dear all, let me first thank to Madame Bonner for her informative, detailed and significant report during intense COVID-19 times that definitely exacerbated inequality towards long-term and chronically ill persons. Personally, I believe the most significant aspect in this report we need to carefully address is that chronic and long-term illnesses do not only create health problems, but also social stigmatization on persons affected. Unexpectedly and uncontrollably, this has never been life choice of anyone. Therefore, we should fix our perception in the first place. In this regard, we should work on elimination of all forms of discrimination simultaneously and holistically across sectors and continents. Starting from national level, I would like to emphasize the potential role of state and parliament in ensuring legal protection together with effective implementation mechanisms. Speaking from experience of my country that might perhaps give different perspective, as early as in 2003, we adopted law on care for chronically ill people of Azerbaijan, specifically suffering from wildly spared diabetes, followed by law on hemophilia and thalassemia and state program on chronic kidney disease. Laws and state programs ensured equal rights of persons affected, their employability rights and social protection, responsibility before law in case of such violations, and state funding for several treatments. State funding has also been extended to patients with thalassemia alongside establishment of medical center and launch of social project for the life without thalassemia. NGOs, together with UN agencies operating in Azerbaijan, have also implemented various social integration programs for chronically ill people, conducted awareness campaigns, hence have been active in promoting such equality. I believe this kind of synthesis is crucial for positive development. Alongside, employers in worldwide should also have legal role to provide equality and support for workers with chronic illnesses. Workplaces should adjust to equality acts, draft health policies, offer flexible working hours, hold trainings for whole staff to raise awareness, build health-minded teams, support return to work policy, and acknowledge individual abilities rather than limitations. Together we can, and we are all as equal as anyone else. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Konul-Nurlieva. Now we will have actually from Ukraine, Mrs. Yulia Ushinikova. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. We find this resolution extremely important and urgently needed for the PASE members. Take proper action. I want to thank at first the rapporteur for her excellent work. The number and severity of chronic and long-term illness in Europe has been increased lately, while severely, inefficiently, disproportionately treated across the countries. The resolution highlights that chronic and long-term illness are non-communicable diseases that often require long and expensive treatment for the community. This is the key issue to be addressed. The treatment is long and expensive. That means that the member states should create proper legal conditions to allow people having chronic and long-term illness to afford long treatment from the time and social security perspectives, as well as in terms of labor law. The treatment and rehabilitation is very expensive and requires proper funding. Unfortunately, special programs for adults barely exist. They are not sufficiently funded, if even so. That's why the issue of insurance and access to health care and rehabilitation for adults is highlighted in the resolution in the recommendation. The public-private partnership and investment into the rehabilitation services are urgently required. The resolution states that chronic and long-term illness are obstacles to dignity, well-being and self-fulfillment. It's very important for the member states to ensure the dedicated mental health support for these people and create the proper conditions of their living and geriatric hospitals. The resolution suggests that through their various public policies, the authorities are able to limit the number of consequences to the chronic and long-term illness, also through an innovative vision to disability and disabilities offered the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We claim member states to reconcile in existing public policies and make them more comprehensive, more inclusive and feasible. We fully support the action proposed in the resolution, but first, I would like to stress the value of genetic research and laboratory facility for a high-quality genetic test analysis, which to allow early revealing of genetic-based diagnosis and early intervention. For this purpose, member states should support and ensure proper funding and infrastructure. Genetic tests should become more available for population. It's very important not to limit the generally known chronic and long-term illness based on the national registers. I appreciated that resolution stressed the important role of parliaments and gave some guidelines what as parliaments should to do in their home countries, to promote the principle, to adopt legislation, to ensure the allocation, and contribute the awareness-raising action. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Julia. Now we have the next speaker. She is Mrs. Monika Bartos from Hungary. And I'm so sure she doesn't seem to be here in the hemicycle, but are you on the net connections to us? A bit unclear. Monika Bartos, are you? No. Okay, we move then the next one. Now we move to United Kingdom. Baroness Doreen Massey, please.
Mr. President,
please.
I congratulate Martin Bonner on this very incisive report. She's right to draw attention to the duties on the Council of Europe member states to ensure universal access to the rights of people with disabilities and long-term illness. As the report points out, chronic and long-term illness can have a devastating impact on a person's life, dignity, and ability to function. They're the main cause of premature death and affect human rights and fundamental freedoms. There are undoubtedly differences in the ways in which societies deal with disabilities of all kinds. Knowledge, awareness of, and sympathy towards disability, including disabilities which may not have obvious causes or be obvious to people, have certainly in my own country, the UK, increased. This is largely due to a strong and active voluntary sector who have raised awareness, lobbied for disability rights, and set up help for those who have a disability. In September 2020, the Social Affairs Committee held a public hearing with 4 experts from the public health sector, patient organisations and trade unions. They confirmed the problems around the collection of data, lack of definitions, and the very real problems and prejudices in public perceptions. One participant pointed out that COVID-19 has added stress and discrimination to the position of those with chronic or long-term illness. In her conclusions, the rapporteur describes 2 approaches to chronic and long-term illnesses: the health approach of detecting and treating patients, and the social approach, which seeks to enable integration and return to normal life. The approaches, of course, should complement each other. The Council of Europe Declaration, which established a general framework for equal treatment in employment and work, prohibited all discrimination on the basis of disability and established the principle of equal treatment. This directive will be revised, and member states will need to re-examine their practices in relation to budgets, practices and outcomes in order to pay attention to the well-being of sick people and ensure that health protection is guaranteed. I think the rapporteur has done a great service in drawing attention so precisely in this excellent report to the issues affecting people with chronic and long-term illness. Neglect of their needs and rights, as she says, is unacceptable.
Was that? Thanks. Yeah. I say thanks very much for you, and now we will move to Ukraine. Mrs. Maria Mesentseva. Maria, the floor is yours.
Kiitos, Presidente. Kiitos. Thank you very much in your native language. Kiitos. Dear President, dear Rapporteur, Ms. Warner, dear colleagues. I would like to be focused on one of the most important and personal topics for me and maybe for my constituency, but also for the member countries. Nearly 40 years ago, Betty Ford, the former First Lady of the United States of America, announced to the world that she had been diagnosed with breast cancer and that she would undergo radical mastectomy to remove the tumor. Betty Ford's bold decision to announce this diagnosis shattered the wall of silence surrounding the disease and promoted millions of women to be scanned. As a result, the rate of breast cancer detection in the US has risen sharply. Researchers have called this Betty Ford effect. Breast cancer accounts for the largest share in the structure of women's cancer. Thus, the percentage of breast cancer among all diagnosis cases of cancer in women per year is 23.1. Ukraine ranks one of the first places in Europe in number of patients with this pathology, unfortunately. The scale of this program is growing catastrophically due to the lack of a well-established system of mass diagnosis in member states, the prevention and the system on mammology services. But as a result, in most cases, cancer is diagnosed at a later stage, which actually increases the risk of mortality by up to 30%. However, only legislative acts do not provide for us the solution of the issue, as it was announced in the report, for systemic care for a woman diagnosed with breast cancer, from diagnosis, treatment to rehabilitation and prosthetics. It is appropriate to review and aimed at relevant regulations governing the relations, rights, and responsibilities of bodies, institutions, and agencies, and the fight against precancers and breast cancer to help create conditions for women to reduce female mortality and maintain healthy gene pool for a nation. Breast cancer prevention is not just about education. It does depend at each and every one of us, regardless gender. And therefore, for early detection, it is not all necessary to have expensive diagnosis equipment. It really depends on us, dear colleagues. Therefore, I highly salute this report, and I take this opportunity to send a positive signal to my native constituency at the eastern Ukraine that this topic is very well covered in the report. I salute it, and I call for all the colleagues to support it. Many thanks. Merci. Thank you, President. Thank you again.
Thanks, Maria, for your presentation, and also the title of Native Language Keeper. Sorry, I don't speak Ukrainian well enough. I would like to do that one. I'm supposed to speak Hungary, because Hungarian language and Finnish are close to each other. I don't. But most important, we do have now connections to Mrs. Monika Bartos in Hungary. Please, the connection is there, I suppose. And the floor is yours. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for the floor, Mr. President, and thank you for your kindness and help. First of all, I would like to thank for the rapporteurs for raising this topic. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities affects 650 million people. This fact shows the importance of the subject. This is why the Hungarian National Assembly adopted unanimously the bill on promulgation in 2007. I can tell you that the Convention brought a paradigm shift in Hungarian and international disability strategies in as much as it focused on a human rights-based approach, contrary to the paternalistic approach of the previous decades. With regard to the rights of persons with disabilities, the key legal document in the Hungarian legislation is the Act on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It can be said that at the time of its adoption, this act was a unique piece of legislation and was one of the principal reasons why the UN honored Hungary with the Roosevelt International Disability Award in 2000. The primary objective of the act is to guarantee the right of persons with disabilities and thus to promote their equal opportunities, independent living and active involvement in social life. Moreover, the Act provides for specific rights of people with disabilities, such as, to give but a few examples, the right to rehabilitation, to aid, to assistance services, to early development, and the right to have integrated or protected access to the labor market. The implementation of the provision of the CRPD Convention takes place at several levels. One of the elements of the National Disability Programme. It set out the goals and directions to be implemented between 2015 and 2025. The National Primary Healthcare Programme has been started with the aim of bringing primary healthcare closer to all people and providing people-centered health services. A new tender titled 3 Generations for Health has primarily been dedicated to increase the number of healthy life years. In order to promote the healthcare system, 5 national healthcare programs have been developed. For example, Hungary has been operating a national program against cancer since 1993. In line with the objectives of the draft resolution, Hungary is constantly developing its screening system for chronic diseases. It is important for the government to employ people with reduced working capacities. While in 2010, only 18% of people with reduced working capacities worked, today the proportion is 44%. I would like to emphasize that the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities has a beneficial effect. Therefore, I encourage every country to ratify and apply it. And I would like to congratulate on the report for the rapporteurs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Monika Bartos. Next one is from Croatia, Mr. Domako Hadjukovic. Not connected. I heard that there is no connection. If he will be connected later on, I will allow him to come. Следующий мы будем в Россия, господин Александр Башкин. Пожалуйста. Тоже нет. Yes, okay. Господин Башкин. Да, пожалуйста.
Есть, да. Слышно меня, да?
Да, пожалуйста.
Уважаемый Тима, Дорогие коллеги, как человек, имеющий медицинское образование, более того, 4 года отработавший в психиатрической клинике, я хорошо понимаю все, о чем хотела сегодня нам сказать коллега Вонне. Несмотря на то, что эйблизм – это сравнительно новый термин, люди с хроническими заболеваниями по вине общества ущемлялись всегда. Они были затруднены в возможности создавать семью или воспитывать детей, ущемлены в бытовых вопросах или пользовании социальной инфраструктурой, испытывали сложности в поиске работы и осуществлении профессиональной деятельности. Человеческая цивилизация проделала большой путь для искоренения этого ужасного явления. Началось все с массовой элиминации из правового поля государств правил, ограничивающих права и социальные возможности больных хроническими и продолжительными заболеваниями. Было такое, кстати, явление до 70-х годов прошлого века во многих государствах. Следующим этапом стало развитие инфраструктуры, приспособленной для облегчения жизнедеятельности людей с хроническими заболеваниями и инвалидностью. Но самым непростым этапом стало формирование терпимости и чувствительности к таким людям в сознании членов общества. Этот процесс оказался самым сложным и продолжается в большинстве стран до настоящего времени. Именно поэтому я хочу особенно отметить актуальность пункта 6.4 проекта резолюции, призывающего проводить совместно с гражданским обществом, основанной на фактических данных, эффективной кампании по повышению осведомленности общественности о хронических и продолжительных заболеваниях. Причины эйблизма связаны с негативным восприятием обществом отклонения от нормы. Оправданием дискриминации служат стереотипы, которых придерживается значительная часть людей. А стереотипы, к сожалению, это и есть самая длительная и самая хроническая болезнь всего общества. Мы крайне тяжело расстаемся с ними во всех сферах нашей жизни, в науке или в политике, в вопросах воспитания детей или в отношении к людям, не похожим на большинство остальных. Несмотря на то, что содержание доклада в основном обращено к людям, страдающим соматическими хроническими заболеваниями, я все же хочу несколько слов сказать о больных психическими заболеваниями. Сегодняшний разговор про них даже в большей степени. Большинство психических заболеваний, за исключением нескольких видов экзогенных психозов или психопатий, являются хроническими. Кроме того, во многих случаях у таких лиц появляются дополнительные ограничения. В первую очередь ограничения свободы. Поэтому я считаю, что эта категория людей должна быть особенно учтена и в тексте доклада, и в сегодняшнем обсуждении. В заключение, я хочу выразить сожаление, что такой актуальный и острый доклад прозвучал в конце последнего дня нашей сессии, а не был самым первым. И я хочу поблагодарить госпожу Мартину Вонне за аккуратное и объективное раскрытие непростой и щекотливой темы. Предлагаю поддержать предложенный доклад. Спасибо.
Спасибо большое, господин Башкин, за ваше выступление. Le prochain est Madame Nicolette Triss, France, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci pour ce débat sur les discriminations, hélas bien réelles et douloureuses pour les intéressés, à l'encontre de personnes atteintes de maladies chroniques et de longue durée. Ces affections, le plus souvent lourdes et invalidantes, concernent au moins un tiers de la population vivant en Europe, soit plusieurs dizaines de millions de nos concitoyens. Comme le démontre admirablement le rapport de notre collègue Martine Vonner, que je félicite pour la qualité de son travail, les maladies chroniques et de longue durée sont d'une grande variété. Toutes, qu'il s'agisse de cancer, de la maladie de Crohn, de la maladie de Charcot, de la sclérose en plaques, du diabète ou de la borréliose de Lyme, pour ne prendre que ces exemples, engendrent des troubles physiques handicapants au quotidien. Aux symptômes de la maladie s'ajoutent bien souvent d'autres conséquences très négatives pour les personnes qui en sont victimes, lesquelles impactent leur vie sociale et professionnelle, voire très directement leurs revenus et moyens de subsistance. Cette double peine, que souligne très justement notre rapporteur, est hélas fréquente et place ces malades dans une situation discriminatoire, voire les stigmatise. Je ne prendrai pour ma part que l'exemple des victimes de la borréliose de Lyme, que je connais bien pour être rapporteur de la mission d'information à l'Assemblée nationale concernant le parcours de soins de ces patients. En fait, il faudrait dire le parcours du combattant. C'est une zoonose qui est pourtant courante en Europe. Elle a près de 850 000 nouveaux cas par an dans la seule Union européenne.
Cette maladie demeure trop souvent mal identifiée, plaçant les personnes atteintes dans une situation que le rapport qualifie opportunément d'errance diagnostique, ce qui se traduit parfois ultérieurement par des complications significatives. Beaucoup de patients se sentent démunis et ignorés face à cette affection dont le coût de prise en charge est conséquent. À l'errance diagnostique se rajoute la détresse du patient. Le cas des malades de la borréliose de Lyme ne fait malheureusement pas figure d'exception. Il en va de même pour les victimes de cancer, de diabète, de maladies inflammatoires chroniques intestinales ou de troubles psychiatriques chroniques. La liste est malheureusement pas exhaustive. Certes, des avancées ont été enregistrées dans plusieurs pays pour la prise en charge médicale et sociale de ces populations. Le droit à l'oubli pour les patients en rémission constitue également un acquis précieux pour leur permettre de bâtir des projets à l'instar de leurs compatriotes non malades. Il faut néanmoins faire plus, comme la résolution soumise à notre vote qui invite les États membres du Conseil de l'Europe. Pour ce qui me concerne, je souscris intégralement aux pistes proposées par Martine Vonner. Il importe effectivement de renforcer les capacités de dépistage et de prévention, de développer l'offre de soins et de services destinés à ces malades, de mieux garantir les droits des intéressés, de mener des campagnes de sensibilisation et d'avoir une approche globale qui ne mette pas de côté leurs familles. Une ratification de la Charte sociale européenne par l'Union européenne paraît en plus souhaitable à terme. Chers collègues, vous l'aurez compris, je soutiens le projet de résolution en discussion et je le voterai sans réserve. Merci.
Merci beaucoup pour votre présentation. Next one, Mr. Tural Kanyaliev, Azerbaïdjan. Pas connecté. OK. Yes. Est-ce que c'est ça? Non. Si, si. OK. OK.
Okay, dear Mr. President, thank you. And I would like to thank the rapporteurs for their job and drawing our attention to this very important topic, which is discrimination against persons dealing with long-term illness. Dear colleagues, no country or region in the world has been immune to the spread and destruction of pandemic, as well as Azerbaijan's internally displaced persons are particularly vulnerable to the coronavirus, and myself and the Khankandi city constituency in the Karabakh region of Azerbaijan that I represent. IDPs often lack proper access to healthcare, and pre-existing conditions put them at even greater risk of infection and related complications because of chronic disease or long-term illness. Almost 1 million Azerbaijanis, as well as my family, who had been forcibly displaced from Karabakh, have developed cardiovascular diseases, cancers, chronic respiratory diseases, and diabetes, followed epilepsy due to the stress of displacement, inadequate housing, living conditions, and medical care. And these problems present a huge challenge for IDPs and country's health system until today. For IDPs, emotional stress is a frequent concern. This is a challenge for health services, and that engaging with the health system is physically, emotionally, and financially burdensome. Moreover, we witness numerous instances in which individuals make harmful decisions because of healthcare conditions. You know that for these people, missing their medications for a week or even just a day can have serious consequences. Accessing financial services such as insurances and bank loans is also a particular challenge for patients with chronic or long-term conditions. Their disease may be considered a pre-existing condition and may not be covered. I also came across with the problems that young patients face different spheres, including education. Young patients, for example, highlighted they may need to miss courses because of treatments, have difficulty to perform exams because of health conditions. These examples show that there is no room for discrimination on the basis of the health conditions. Of course, I believe that all patients with chronic and long-term conditions should be protected from discrimination on the ground of the health status. One urgent issue also needs to be mentioned, that Armenia must deliver landmine maps as its international obligation, and that we displaced people from Karabakh region of Azerbaijan can finally go back to our home and live healthy life. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Now we move To Switzerland, Mr. Pierre-Alain Fridet. The floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Vice-président, Mesdames, Messieurs, chers collègues. En tant que médecin, je ne peux qu'abonder dans le sens des propos de Madame Vonner, que je félicite pour son excellent rapport. Il existe sans doute un phénomène de discrimination, voire de stigmatisation de personnes atteintes de maladies chroniques. Des problèmes d'accès à l'emploi, des problèmes d'accès à des prestations sociales, des problèmes d'accès à des bâtiments publics si les troubles touchent les capacités motrices, et bien d'autres. Mais d'un autre côté, la société, dans un esprit de solidarité, offre ou devrait offrir, car ce n'est pas toujours le cas, des prestations de soins adéquats aux personnes malades. Rappelons encore que ces prestations de soins aux malades chroniques représentent un coût toujours plus important dans nos systèmes de santé. En Suisse, par exemple, les coûts de la santé représentent 11 à 12% du PIB. Et avec l'espérance de vie qui s'allonge et le vieillissement des populations en Europe, la charge, si l'on peut dire, va continuer à augmenter. Dans nombre de nos pays, l'espérance de vie dépasse les 80 ans. Mais des études montrent que l'espérance de vie en bonne santé dépasse à peine les 60 ans. Nombre de personnes vivent donc ou vont vivre près de 2 décennies avec un problème de santé. On assiste à une progression épidémique de ces maladies chroniques non transmissibles. Si l'on accepte les maladies congénitales ou acquises dans la force de l'âge, ces problèmes de santé surviennent en règle générale après 50 ans. Des cancers, des maladies cardiovasculaires, des troubles dégénératifs de l'appareil locomoteur, des troubles psychiques, dépression, syndrome psychorganique. Ces troubles peuvent raccourcir la vie, mais les progrès extraordinaires de la science et des soins permettent dans la majorité des cas une survie prolongée. Mais une prévention ou un dépistage précoce existe dans nombre de ces troubles et je salue dans le rapport l'allusion faite à cet aspect au chapitre 6, alinéa 1. Dépistage des cancers, surtout cancer du sein, du col de l'utérus et le plus performant, celui du cancer du côlon. Mais c'est dans le domaine de la prévention que des efforts majeurs doivent encore se développer, car les grands tueurs, les grands responsables des maladies chroniques sont connus. La malbouffe, les boissons sucrées, des sodas en excès, l'obésité, avec ses conséquences, hypertension, diabète, la sédentarité, la pollution, le stress, notamment professionnel, qui a de grandes répercussions psychiques, l'alcool et surtout le tabac, le seul produit en vente libre dont on sait qu'il va tuer ou raccourcir la vie d'un de ses consommateurs sur 2. Chers collègues, la discrimination à l'égard des personnes atteintes de maladies chroniques et de longue durée est inacceptable et je salue le rapport, ses conclusions et espère un engagement clair et déterminé de nos différents États pour solutionner, en tous les cas améliorer ces injustices. Mais mon propos de ce jour est en plus de rappeler que l'idéal serait de réduire les causes de ces maladies chroniques. Dépistage et prévention doivent devenir des priorités. Vivre longtemps, oui, mais idéalement indépendant et en bonne santé.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Fridet. Le prochain, Monsieur Alain Milon, France.
Merci, Monsieur le
La
Président.
connexion existe, oui.
Vous m'entendez?
S'il vous plaît.
Merci. Le travail de notre rapporteur Martine Vonner permet de mettre en lumière un problème majeur en Europe. Les maladies chroniques et de longue durée altèrent la vie d'au moins un tiers de la population européenne, ça a déjà été dit. S'il n'existe pas de consensus sur une définition unique des maladies chroniques et de longue durée, elles ont toutes pour conséquence de limiter la pleine jouissance de tous les droits humains et de toutes les libertés fondamentales. Ceci est généralement lié aux traitements, qui peuvent être lourds, et aux discriminations dont peuvent souffrir les personnes atteintes de ces maladies. C'est le cas notamment du cancer ou des maladies psychiatriques qui bouleversent à jamais la vie des malades et de leurs familles, et ce, malgré des rémissions ou des guérisons. Pour répondre au mieux aux besoins des personnes atteintes des maladies chroniques et de longue durée, les politiques publiques doivent, d'une part, se concentrer sur l'aspect santé. Ceci implique un effort de recherche pour développer des moyens de traitement et de diagnostic, puis un effort pour mise à disposition des malades des traitements adéquats et permettre la réalisation de diagnostics. Le dépistage est souvent primordial pour ces maladies. Plus le diagnostic sera réalisé tôt, plus les traitements et les solutions thérapeutiques permettront, on le sent bien, de soulager ou de guérir. Ceci nécessite des moyens financiers considérables. Malheureusement, tous les États ne disposent pas des mêmes ressources, d'où des différences importantes dans la prise en charge des patients. Le programme santé de l'Union européenne a été doté d'un budget de 5,1 milliards d'euros et la Commission européenne a annoncé un vaste plan de lutte contre le cancer. Je souhaite que ces fonds puissent servir à aider les malades issus des États où le système de santé est le moins protecteur. D'autre part, les politiques publiques doivent aussi faciliter l'intégration des malades, ça a été dit. Tous les États membres de notre organisation, sauf le Liechtenstein, ont signé la Convention nationale des Nations Unies relative aux droits des personnes handicapées qui couvre les malades atteints de maladies chroniques et de longue durée. Les États sont donc tenus de mettre en place des politiques pour lutter contre la discrimination et favoriser l'égalité des chances. Cela passe par l'accès à l'emploi, l'accessibilité des lieux publics, mais aussi par l'éducation qui favorise l'acceptation de l'autre malgré la maladie. La résolution qui nous est proposée souligne à juste titre que les parlements nationaux ont un rôle important à jouer en la matière et je peux témoigner du rôle qu'a joué en France le Sénat pour imposer au gouvernement et en particulier au ministère du Budget de développer davantage l'accessibilité des bâtiments publics. Enfin, je rappelle à nouveau les États membres qui n'ont pas encore fait ainsi que l'Union européenne a ratifié la Charte sociale européenne révisée. Merci.
Merci, Monsieur Milon. From France, we move to Turkey, and next one is Mr. Halil Odzavli. Is the connection? Connection exists? Yes. Yes, please.
Dear President, dear colleagues, the discrimination towards persons suffering from chronic and long-term illnesses are one of the primary reasons of gender and premature mortality. The OECD report titled How is Life indicates a third of the European population suffers from chronic illnesses. And 6% of adults have recently experienced depressive symptoms. 1 in 8 people experience more negative than positive emotions during a day. This data shows us that chronic and long-term illnesses are much more common in Europe than we think. For sure, member states have to take necessary precautions to stop the spread of these illnesses and to protect the people who have experienced these diseases. In this context, I would like to congratulate the rapporteur for her high-quality report, which sheds light on the steps that could be taken to remove obstacles to the rights of persons living with chronic and long-term illnesses. However, similar measures need to be taken for the homeless and the poor individuals, because, as mentioned by Madam Rapporteur in her statement, since 1946, the World Health Organization has defined health as a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being and not merely the absence of disease as infirmity. Besides, according to OECD, health is to be and feel well, to enjoy a long life free from physical or mental illnesses, and to be able to participate in the activities one desires. According to these definitions, to be healthy is the right of the poor and homeless people. And in my opinion, being healthy should be considered as a human right as well. Nevertheless, the report rightly emphasized that the measures taken to combat the current pandemic caused by the novel coronavirus disease has particularly affected those persons. As the health crisis deepens, the plight of these persons is drawing less and less attention, to the point of not being heard at all. While the health authorities are dealing with this unprecedented health crisis, they should not forget the persons dealing with chronic and long-term illnesses, and they should provide proper conditions that the persons who are struggling with chronic and long-term illnesses can have the treatment they need, and more importantly, the treatment they deserve. As you know, some banks do not give loans to those with chronic and long-term illnesses, and even some health insurance companies don't insure them. And yet, establishing patient protection system, such as the right to be forgotten, carries utmost importance to ensure to lighten the negative effects on the persons who have chronic and long-term illnesses. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chaveli. Particularly, I was very pleased that you remind us that to be healthy is one of the basic human rights, obviously. Now we move to Cyprus, Mr. Konstantinos Evstatiou. Okay, you are there. Please.
Mr. Chairperson. First of all, I would like to congratulate the rapporteur for the excellent work and the comprehensive report on this very sensitive issue. As described in the report, the many direct and indirect effects of these illnesses undeniably impair the quality of life of affected individuals, limiting their full participation in equal social life as citizens in all sectors of society and rendering them more susceptible to discrimination and inequality. And more vulnerable the person is, the more obvious the symptoms are of this situation. What do we have to deal having the pandemic in mind is that we have to remodel, we have to revalue, reinterpret it, and reset our social models and framework. We need, as politicians, to take decisions and administrative procedures which are really in need for persons who are vulnerable. And what we have to do is to admit that modeling the society without taking into consideration the vulnerables and the people with chronic ill diseases. This is this is a very bad situation and a clear fail of our society. So what we have to take into consideration of the pandemic is that we have to give more and special care of the vulnerable children and adolescents for the benefit of our society based on democracy and freedom. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. We still have 5 speakers on my list, and as I promised, I try to keep the list so that we can all have the presentation. So please try to be swift, and we must actually a little bit hurry after that. But now, Mrs. Larissa Bilozir, Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to start with congratulations to reporter, Ms. Vone. It's a deep and comprehensive report that Ukrainian delegation will definitely support. The issue of discrimination of persons dealing with chronic and long-term illnesses is very relevant nowadays, especially in the era of COVID-19 pandemic, when persons with chronic illnesses are deprived of sufficient medical support and are of great mortality risk if being infected by coronavirus. I also want to support a reporter in her call on member states to intensify their efforts and provide the health system with sufficient budgetary resources to offer adequate health protection of such people. As we see today, the big amount of resources are focused to combat coronavirus, while, for example, in Ukraine, last year, more than 80% of those who died from chronic illnesses, such as cardiovascular illnesses, diabetes, cancer, and only 1.5% died from COVID-19. Despite of this, resources are distributed unproportionally. Often finances are taken from the programs for treating chronic illnesses, such as cancer or orphan diseases, in favor of vaccines and other measures to combat COVID-19. The situation is deteriorating also because of anti-COVID measures. when the number of people that become aware of their disease in the late stage are growing, and the death rates are also growing. It is worth noting that children with disabilities are a particularly vulnerable category of persons with chronic and long-term illnesses. I would like to call on to the obligation of the Council of Europe member states to ensure the right for education, the right for a family, the harmonious development of children with disabilities, and to provide a safe space based on single criteria, the best interest of a child. There are almost 170,000 children with disabilities in Ukraine who usually cannot exercise their right at full range, including the right to education. Since 2017, Ukraine has been implementing a strategy for deinstitutionalization of children with disabilities and raising a child in the family, according to a strategy recommended by our European partners. But for many children with various nosologies, inclusive education in usual school is insufficient, and they cannot study in usual schools. So special schools for children with special educational needs with disabilities and sanitarian schools where children with chronic illnesses study and simultaneously undergo rehabilitation have to be preserved. Children with special education needs have the right for the quality education, adaptation, and self-realization. Thank you for attention.
Thank you very much, Larissa. Let's move quickly. Next one is United Kingdom, Mrs. Tonia Antoniazzi.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président. Je voudrais remercier le rapporteur pour ce rapport excellent. Je continuerai à parler en anglais. But this report is excellent, the discrimination against persons dealing with chronic and long-term illnesses, and I would like to confirm my support of the report. I'd like to take this opportunity to speak because in the UK Parliament, I am the co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group for medical cannabis under prescription. And I have worked since taking my seat in the Parliament in 2017 to fight for access to medical cannabis for those with chronic and long-term illnesses, from multiple sclerosis to cancer and also epilepsy. I currently work closely with a group of children with intractable epilepsy, a disease which is indeed an obstacle to individual well-being and fulfilment, which no one, especially a child, should be deprived of. These children with the medication given to them makes them vegetables, makes them not able to live a life worth living. Their determined families have fought for them to get access to medical cannabis in the United Kingdom, mostly the brand Bedrocan, which comes from the Netherlands. And following the high-profile campaign in the UK of a couple of families, including them 6-year-old Alfie Dingley, the law in the UK was changed to allow this access to medical cannabis under prescription on the 1st of November 2018. Alfie suffered from up to 150 life-threatening seizures a week, and in desperation his family took him to Holland for treatment with the whole plant extract medical cannabis. This was life-transforming. However, on return to the United Kingdom, Alfie could not access the medical cannabis as it was deemed that by the government it had no medical value. Now, these families, and despite numerous meetings with ministers and the senior NHS leaders, the situation still remains unresolved in the UK. The discrimination faced by these children for whom conventional anti-epilepsy drugs do not work is unbearable. Unbearable because they do not have the benefit of time, and the priority of medical cannabis under prescription was pushed to the end of the queue because of Brexit and now because of COVID. These families are emotionally and financially broken. Their children are at risk of being without their life-transforming medicine within weeks. We are awaiting a response to a letter signed by over 100 MPs from the Prime Minister, but we have still not had that reply, and it is an utter disgrace. Merci, mes collègues. I wanted to share that with you because it's very, very important for this debate.
Thank you very much. И мы продолжаем тоже быстро, как возможно, господин Владимир Кургли, Россия. Пожалуйста.
Господин председатель.
Пожалуйста. Слышно? В начале своего выступления я также хочу выразить благодарность госпоже Ване за проделанную работу. Я хотел бы в своем выступлении обратить внимание на важный аспект и продолжить мысль коллеги Фриде. Одной из форм дискриминации граждан в плане возникновения хронических заболеваний может быть отсутствие государственной системы действенной профилактики. По данным Всемирной организации здравоохранения, 4 группы хронических неинфекционных заболеваний вносят наибольший вклад в смертность во всем мире. К ним относят сердечно-сосудистые заболевания, сахарный диабет 2 типа, злокачественные новообразования и хроническую обструктивную болезнь легких. Эти заболевания имеют общие доказанные поведенческие факторы риска, то есть те факторы, которые зависят от самого человека. Курение, избыточное потребление алкоголя, низкая физическая активность, нерациональное питание. Существуют также и метаболические факторы риска, такие как артериальная гипертония и ожирение. В целом, поведенческие факторы риска определяют значительный вклад в общую смертность. Во всем мире курение обусловливает около 71% случаев рака легкого, 42% случаев хронических респираторных заболеваний, 10% случаев сердечно-сосудистых заболеваний. Вклад факторов риска в заболеваемость и смертность основных хронических заболеваний определяется их распространенностью в конкретной популяции, ассоциированными с ними рисками заболеваемости и смертности, которые также могут варьировать в различных популяциях в зависимости от социально-экономических факторов и этнических особенностей. Поэтому возникновение и течение хронических заболеваний в развитии инвалидности многое зависит именно от профилактики. И важнейшим их способом борьбы с неинфекционными патологиями является целенаправленная деятельность по сокращению всех факторов риска. Таким образом, если на государственном уровне уделить максимальное внимание профилактике и внедрению принципов здорового образа жизни, то во многих случаях удастся предотвратить критическое развитие и неконтролируемое течение заболеваний и, как следствие, развитие инвалидности. Так, только отказ от курения, причем в любом возрасте, как профилактическая мера, существенно снижает риск инвалидности и смертности. По моему мнению, вопросы профилактики неинфекционных хронических заболеваний, внедрение принципов здорового образа жизни являются приоритетными и требуют особого внимания во всех странах. Благодарю за внимание. Спасибо большое. We move now to Turkey. Mrs. Selin Sayık-Böke. Floor is yours, Selim. Yes, Selim is there, please.
So the pandemic has been a reminder of how important our health is and how health conditions can become the premise of discrimination. Early on, the pandemic fueled racism and xenophobia worldwide. And as the pandemic progressed, the differential effects on the virus across different age groups were identified, leading to age-dependent discriminatory lockdown conditions. The pandemic also increased the burden on our healthcare systems, where health practitioners were enforced to make very difficult choices between patients. What more, patients who were afraid to go to the hospitals for being exposed to the virus chose not to visit healthcare facilities. In either case, this led to discriminatory outcomes where healthcare access of persons, especially with chronic and long-term illnesses, was hindered. And as this report very diligently documents, indeed, this discrimination is not pertinent to the pandemic. It was existing long before, but this discrimination was aggravated with the pandemic. I already mentioned the healthcare dimension, but the second is access to economic opportunities, rightfully detailed in the opinion paper. Persons with chronic and long-term illnesses usually face financial exclusion, where their health conditions either limit their probability of access to credit or proper coverage of insurance. This is the case even after their health conditions have fully recovered and sufficient time has passed where their health risk assessment is equivalent to the average health risk assessment of the public. Indeed, many civil society organizations have long been pushing for the right to be forgotten after a certain period of time lapses. Another aspect of economic discrimination is regarding access to employment. Many employers are either reluctant or not informed enough to ensure a proper return to work. Proper meaning that workstation conditions and tasks are most of the time not adopted. This discrimination has further deepened during the pandemic. In many cases, we are observing that firms that are downsizing are dismissing workers with chronic illnesses and eroding their very basic economic and social rights. All of these are very worrying developments, and they render this current report very timely and extremely important. And as such, I strongly support it, and I also support the opinion report and commend the rapporteurs and the Secretariat for their diligent work. So what's the solution? The solution lies in a 5P approach. We prevent chronic and long-term illnesses as much as we can. We protect persons with chronic and long-term illnesses by ensuring them universal healthcare services as a basic human right, and also by strengthening occupational medicine. We prosecute those who discriminate against these persons by means of dissuasive sanctions. We adopt new policies, such as the right to be forgotten. And finally, we have partnerships with the patients themselves, civil society, and experts. Only through a holistic approach like this, we can build a just and equal society.
Céline, thank you very much for your very, very clear statement. Now we move Canada, our guest across Atlantic, Madame Lucie Monsion. Please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour à tous. Je vous remercie de l'opportunité de prendre la parole et j'aimerais féliciter Madame Vonner pour son excellent rapport. Mes remarques porteront sur la prévention des discriminations liées à l'emploi que subissent les personnes atteintes de maladies chroniques et de longue durée au Canada. En fait de cadre juridique, au Canada, les droits de la personne sont protégés par des lois fédérales, provinciales et territoriales. À l'échelle fédérale, la Charte canadienne des droits et libertés protège les droits de tous les Canadiens de bénéficier d'un traitement égal devant la loi. En outre, la loi canadienne sur les droits de la personne protège contre la discrimination les personnes employées par le gouvernement du Canada, les gouvernements des Premières Nations où les lieux de travail sont sous réglementation fédérale ou qui en reçoivent des services. Au chapitre de l'équité en matière d'emploi, les droits des Canadiens vivant avec des handicaps sont protégés par un certain nombre de textes législatifs. Par exemple, la loi sur l'équité en matière d'emploi s'applique aux industries et aux lieux de travail qui sont réglementés par le fédéral, aux sociétés d'État et à certaines autres organisations et administrations fédérales. La loi vise à assurer l'égalité dans l'emploi, en particulier pour 4 groupes distincts de Canadiens qui ont été historiquement désavantagés sur le lieu de travail, notamment les personnes vivant avec des handicaps. La loi précise que l'équité en matière d'emploi requiert, outre un traitement identique des personnes, des mesures spéciales et des aménagements adaptés aux différences. En plus, la loi canadienne sur l'accessibilité vise à soutenir les Canadiens, en particulier ceux qui vivent avec des handicaps, en cernant, en supprimant et en prévenant les obstacles dans divers domaines, y compris l'emploi. Ainsi, de nombreux Canadiens atteints de maladies chroniques et de longue durée peuvent prétendre à des prestations d'invalidité ou à des accommodements. Malgré ces mesures législatives visant à favoriser l'égalité, à éliminer plus généralement la discrimination, la Commission canadienne des droits de la personne affirme que 40% des personnes vivant avec des handicaps ont déclaré que ces dernières avaient influencé leur choix de carrière. De plus, il y a des lacunes dans ces mesures. Les personnes qui ont des invalidités épisodiques, c'est-à-dire des affections chroniques et de longue durée caractérisées par des périodes imprévisibles de bonne santé et interrompues par des périodes de maladie ou d'invalidité, peuvent être limitées dans leur participation à l'emploi, nuisant potentiellement à leur sécurité économique, en particulier lorsque des accommodements ne leur sont pas proposés sur le lieu de travail. Bien que les lois et des politiques aient été mises en place au Canada, il reste encore du chemin à parcourir pour éliminer la discrimination sur le lieu de travail à l'égard des personnes atteintes de maladies chroniques et de longue durée au Canada. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Merci beaucoup. Dear colleagues, I want to say thank you very much indeed for this discussion. I purposefully allowed it to go a bit over time. The theme is really discussed in international forums like this one, even at home, discrimination against people in chronic illnesses. Thanks very much for very comprehensive and interesting debate. And now we will move to the end part of this discussion. Madam Vonner, Rapporteur, do you want to add something? 3 minutes for you now. Yeah, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président, et vraiment merci, chers collègues. Vous l'avez compris, ce sujet me tient vraiment tout particulièrement à cœur, car dans ma fonction de psychiatre, je suis confrontée régulièrement à ces personnes concernées par une maladie psychique ou d'autres touchées psychiquement par des maladies qui impactent durement leur vie, comme le cancer. Mais en ce moment, face à la crise sanitaire, nous n'avons jamais constaté autant de personnes en détresse psychique face à la Covid-19 et face à toute cette ambiance tout à fait particulière. Ces maladies chroniques nuisent à la pleine et égale jouissance de tous les droits et de toutes les libertés fondamentales, et je suis profondément attachée à toutes ces libertés, et je souhaitais le rappeler, et je ne peux concevoir que ces personnes atteintes par les maladies puissent cumuler les handicaps sociaux, économiques, médicaux et être stigmatisées. Et je remercie vraiment tous les collègues qui ont pris part à cette discussion et qui ont rappelé ces points fondamentaux. Dans le contexte de cette situation sanitaire bouleversée par la Covid, l'Union européenne doit être en mesure d'étendre ses compétences afin d'appuyer la diffusion de bonnes pratiques, notamment le droit à l'oubli. Seuls 4 des pays qui avaient été interrogés lors de l'enquête ont une loi spécifique établissant ce droit à l'oubli. À titre d'exemple, les malades en rémission de cancer ont pu renouer avec une vie normale en ayant la possibilité d'emprunter de l'argent. Je serais d'avis de proposer ce soir une évaluation de l'exercice de ce droit en Europe pour en mesurer le bénéfice et plus clairement identifier ses limites pour le bien-être des malades et donc de prolonger ce travail si cela était possible. Et vraiment pour conclure, je sais que la tâche est grande car des millions d'individus sont concernés par toutes ces discriminations, à commencer notamment par l'accès aux soins. Et je voulais tout particulièrement rappeler dans le cadre de la crise du Covid que l'accès notamment aux traitements précoces doit pouvoir être garanti, ce qui pourra éviter l'apparition partout des Covid longs, donc ces personnes qui ont eu un Covid et qui développent une pathologie chronique. Et véritablement, pour conclure, parce que Angela Merkel était présente parmi nous hier matin et elle a rappelé cette notion de dignité, et or on sait que la stigmatisation des maladies chroniques ont un impact sur la qualité de vie. Donc j'aimerais la citer. Quand il s'agit de dignité humaine, nous ne pouvons pas faire de compromis. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Rapporteure. Now we'll move to Mr. Leit Ramos, the chairman of the committee. Do you want to have 3 minutes? Yes. Mr. Leit Ramos. Is he online? Okay. Connection is or not? Yes, we got the connection, but we lost it. Try again. It would be useful to have the German, obviously, because the committee prepared this report, and obviously the next stage is to agree with it one. And to save time, I already tell that the committee made its draft resolution, and there were 8 amendments which have been tabled. And as far as I understand, all these 8 amendments were approved unanimously by the committee. So we need also Mr. Ramos to agree with this conclusion, if it's so, although we have the minutes too also, if it's really needed. I hope that really the end can go quite swiftly after Mr. Ramos is here, because really this report itself was very excellent, as we agreed. Seemed to be so also that the debate which was going on here, each of us were supporting each of us. No controversial concerning only that issue, that how we should protect better those people who are really suffering on chronic illnesses, and any discrimination is not acceptable at all. But the chairperson of the committee, he is there. Is he there? Okay, if they don't have the chairperson of the committee, we obviously know that the committee has agreed and approved this resolution, and I suppose Mr. Ramos' statement is the same like mine. Excellent debate, thanks very much. Eight amendments were tabled and no objections. I will now ask actually the hemicycle people in the and also outside who are here, is anyone objecting this situation that we can approve the tabled amendments? I don't see any objections, so now we can proceed so that we can take the whole resolution in our discussion. Is it so? Yes, it is so. And now we will go to vote on the whole resolution at once. And you all know the procedure, how to vote here and outside. So I now declare the vote open. The whole resolution concerning the discrimination against persons with chronic illnesses. You all know how to vote. I suppose we are in the stage we can. Okay, we can close the vote and the result. Yes, very rarely. Wow, super, super, super. Unanimously approved. Oh, very nice to be chair for this type of meeting. At last we are united some of the issues. Excellent, excellent report, excellent result. We will move now to the next item. The last item of today, and that's about the Montenegro, post-monitoring dialogue with Montenegro. There is a report prepared, and Mr. Damien Cotier and Mr. Emanuele Zingeris, who have been the rapporteurs for this, I will present the case, this report. We try to be now more swiftly than this previous case. I hope that we can finish the whole setup already 7:30, is it so? Maybe a few minutes later, because we are late a little bit. We'll begin with Mr. Cotier and Mr. Zingeris. Both of you have 7 minutes all together, and obviously can then reply at the end also with 3 minutes altogether. I call now Mr. Cotier.
Merci.
Please. And you are sharing the time, I understood.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Monsieur le Président, en 2015, notre Assemblée a clos le processus de suivi et a initié un processus de dialogue post-suivi avec le Monténégro. Un rapport a été établi début 2020 sur l'état de ce dialogue après 5 années. Il aurait dû être débattu ici il y a 1 an, mais le Covid en a décidé autrement et le rapport a été renvoyé d'abord à la session de janvier dernier, puis une nouvelle fois à la réunion de ce jour. Donc nous espérons aussi que le vote pourra avoir lieu aujourd'hui sur la résolution. Entre-temps, les co-rapporteurs ont changé puisque j'ai rejoint M. Zingeris en remplacement de M. Anne Mulder, qui avait largement contribué au rapport, ce dont nous le remercions. Vu le temps écoulé, vu les développements, nous avons préparé un addendum et une mise à jour du projet de résolution. Les 4 axes du mandat des co-rapporteurs portaient sur l'observation des progrès s'agissant de l'indépendance de la justice, de la confiance dans le processus électoral, la lutte contre la corruption et la liberté des médias. Et au-delà de ces axes, nous gardons un œil attentif sur 3 autres dimensions, la situation des minorités, celle des réfugiés et des personnes déplacées et la liberté de religion. Disons-le d'emblée, Monsieur le Président de séance, après 6 ans, le bilan est en demi-teinte. Il y a d'un côté des évolutions à une situation dont on doit se réjouir. Pensons à la relativement bonne situation des minorités, bien qu'il faille ici rester attentif suite à quelques incidents récents, même s'ils semblent pour l'heure isolés. On pense aussi aux droits des personnes LGBTI, le Monténégro étant le premier pays de la région à avoir introduit un partenariat enregistré. On pense encore, et de manière notable, au transfert pacifique de pouvoir suite aux élections législatives d'août 2020. Le Monténégro a vu ainsi se réaliser pour la première fois une alternance démocratique, la première fois depuis son indépendance. Il y a eu quelques tensions politiques, mais tout s'est passé dans le cadre du respect de la Constitution et il faut s'en féliciter. Et puis d'un autre côté, vous avez les 4 axes dont je viens de parler et là, on constate malheureusement peu, voire pas de progrès. Les attentes de notre Assemblée sont donc déçues et les autorités du Monténégro devront montrer leur volonté claire de faire des progrès à l'avenir. S'agissant de la réforme du système électoral, l'essentiel des réformes n'ont pas été faites, faute aussi du manque de soutien de l'opposition de l'époque, puisqu'il faut des majorités qualifiées. S'agissant de la lutte contre la corruption, on ne constate pas encore de progrès réel dans un domaine pourtant essentiel. S'agissant de la liberté des médias, si des efforts ont été faits, on peine à voir réellement des avancées concrètes et des journalistes restent sous pression, notamment de procédures judiciaires, comme M. Martinovic, un journaliste d'investigation accusé de trafic de drogue alors qu'il enquêtait sur un trafic d'armes. Nous suivons cette procédure avec beaucoup d'attention. On pense aussi à Mme Lakic Oliveira, blessée par balle, dont la vie est concrètement menacée, mais à laquelle les autorités n'ont pas encore attribué la protection nécessaire, ce que nous les invitons à faire sans attendre. S'agissant de l'indépendance de la justice, malgré quelques progrès, un travail important reste aussi à faire aussi ici. Il y a la question des nominations des présidents de tribunaux à multiples reprises. Il y a aussi un autre point très actuel, la réforme du ministère public et du bureau du procureur pour la criminalité organisée et la corruption. Un avis a été demandé à la commission de Venise. Il est critique. Il souligne clairement les décisions qui poseraient problème en termes d'indépendance de la justice et d'état de droit. Par ailleurs, si une réforme du Conseil des procureurs n'est pas impossible, il faut veiller à ne pas politiser sa composition. Il faut par ailleurs dire qu'il n'est pas possible d'abroger la loi pour en créer une presque identique sous un autre nom et de démettre ainsi des magistrats. Lorsqu'il existe des procédures de destitution, elles doivent être suivies et il faut des griefs précis et une procédure équitable. En tant que rapporteur, nous attendons des autorités du Monténégro qu'elles donnent un signal clair sur ces points en tenant compte de l'avis de la Commission de Venise et en n'amenuisant pas l'indépendance de la justice, alors que notre Assemblée attend l'inverse, Monsieur le Président. En conclusion, il y a de bons signaux, mais aussi un long chemin à faire ensemble, en partenaire et dans le dialogue, et c'est pourquoi nous proposons que l'Assemblée décide de poursuivre ce dialogue post-suivi.
Thank you very much. You stole a bit time from Mr. Zingeris, but it's maybe your mutual agreement. Mr. Zingeris, 2.5 minutes, please. No? He's not there. Okay, then we actually save time. You can have a little bit longer speech if you want. Okay. Mr. Zingeris wasn't there. Now we have not too long list of speakers, but I try to be flexible and I try to defend the speakers' rights. If you are tight in your time using, me might go through the whole list because I particularly obviously would like to keep the floor also for representatives from Montenegro, our colleagues from Montenegro, because that's their case. Now first, those who are representing the political groups. Hungary, first Katalin Söber, obviously representing EC group, that's what she is particularly doing.
Ça marche. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Chers collègues, les progrès et réalisations du Monténégro au cours des 15 dernières années sur la voie de l'intégration politique européenne sont remarquables. Nous souhaitons la poursuite de l'avancement et le maintien fructueux d'un processus politique démocratique fonctionnel. La démonstration rassurante d'un processus politique démocratique et d'institutions pleinement fonctionnelles grâce à des élections libres et équitables et à une transition politique sans entraver devrait se poursuivre au cours de tous les actes législatifs et gouvernementaux actuels et futurs, afin de maintenir et de préserver les réalisations et les progrès remarquables du Monténégro sur son chemin vers l'intégration politique européenne 15 ans après avoir retrouvé son indépendance historique et son statut d'État. Nous nous félicitons du fait que le premier projet de stratégie médiatique de Monténégro ait été élaboré. Il est à noter que selon les plans, un comité sera mis en place afin de traiter les phénomènes liés à la désinformation. La création d'un comité composé de représentants de haut niveau de gouvernement, de la police, du bureau, du procureur, des médias et de la société civile est une étape importante vers l'enquête sur toute attaque contre les journalistes. Il reste vraiment important de préserver le caractère multiculturel du Monténégro par l'inclusion et la participation des minorités religieuses et nationales à des consultations efficaces sur toutes les questions qui pourraient effectivement ou potentiellement affecter les droits et le statut établi de ces minorités. Nous saluons la réadmission du Monténégro en novembre 2020 au groupe Egmont des cellules de renseignement financier comme un haut signe promoteur de réformes réussies et d'adaptation aux exigences internationales d'un partenaire fiable et précieux dans la coopération policière. Merci pour votre attention.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup indeed. Next one is from Greece, Mr. Socrates Famelos, representing the United Left.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Dear President, dear colleagues, let me first take this opportunity to note that 54 years ago, on the 21st of April, there was a black day for democracy in Greece, the establishment of a 7-year military dictatorship. The Council of Europe at that time took very important initiatives to address the violation of democracy, of human rights, and tortures by the junta in Greece. Our fight for democracy, for human rights, and for the rule of law is still relevant today and remains our main common goal. With regard to the assessment of the post-monitoring dialogue for Montenegro, I would like to congratulate the rapporteurs for their very thorough assessment. It is our view that they have reached a sound conclusion. Montenegro is making substantial progress, which we should all recognize, but the post-monitoring process should continue. The rapporteurs expressed their concern over negative developments or standstills, particularly with respect to the independence of the judiciary, the situation in the media, and the fight against corruption. We must admit that these are areas of common concern, and all these aspects are linked with the web of political power, and lack of transparency or problematic situation can eventually limit the function of democracy itself. And especially now, during the COVID-19 crisis, we are witnessing changes in all these areas and in our countries, for which we must be alert. We must note that Montenegro is a good example across the Balkan region in several aspects, such as LGBT rights, minority rights, and the fight against discrimination. The very high turnout of voters in the 2020 election, the peaceful shift of power, and the continuing cooperation with the Venice Commission for important reforms are signs that progress can continue. Peace, political reform, and respect for the rule of law are essential for the Balkans, a region with a past full of turmoil. We all need to work together as Balkan countries to overcome divides of the past that have often been fueled by larger international disputes in the diplomatic and economic arenas. The cooperation among Balkan leaders and the PRESPA agreement between Greece and North Macedonia are examples of how such long-standing issues can be worked through. Now, more than ever, we all need to work together and find a common path towards sustainable development to address the effects of the pandemic, the climate crisis, economic challenges, poverty, and inequality. In closing, I would like to know that the peaceful shift in power following the elections of 2020 now offer a new momentum that should allow Montenegro to move forward. Reforms are not only a matter of legislating, but also require will and collaboration to implement. With this in mind, Montenegro will be able to break the glass ceiling. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Famelos. Now we have Mr. Josip Juratovic from Germany representing Socialist Group, please. Not connected. So the voice of Socialist Group is not yet there. We will hear it later on if he comes. Next one is then Monsieur Bernard Fournier, PPE. S'il vous plaît.
Monsieur le Président, mes chers collègues, le Monténégro est membre du Conseil de l'Europe depuis 2007. En 2015, notre Assemblée avait décidé de clore la procédure de suivi et d'engager un dialogue post-suivi. Certes, des progrès ont été accomplis au cours des 10 dernières années. On ne peut que se féliciter des efforts accomplis, notamment pour garantir le droit des minorités et lutter contre les discriminations. Ces progrès sont indéniables et doivent être salués. Toutefois, un certain nombre de difficultés demeurent, ce qui doit nous inciter à maintenir le dialogue post-suivi. En effet, la situation politique dans le pays est loin d'être apaisée. La forte polarisation de la scène politique, exacerbée par des doutes sur l'intégrité des scrutins électoraux, ne permet pas un exercice serein de la démocratie pour mener à bien les réformes attendues. Ainsi, à la suite des élections législatives d'octobre 2016, l'opposition refusait de siéger au Parlement, estimant que de nombreuses fraudes et irrégularités avaient été relevées lors de ce scrutin. De plus, un groupe prévoyant de mener une action terroriste contre les institutions politiques a été arrêté le jour de ces élections législatives. Au cours d'un interrogatoire, ils ont affirmé que les dirigeants du principal parti d'opposition avaient participé à l'organisation de cette tentative d'attentat, ce que l'opposition nie, soutenant qu'il s'agit d'un complot organisé par le parti au pouvoir pour la discréditer. Les élections législatives de 2020 ont bien permis la première alternance démocratique depuis l'indépendance du pays, mais il apparaît nécessaire de mettre en place un processus global et inclusif pour réformer le cadre électoral. De plus, l'indépendance de la justice et la lutte contre la corruption sont les thèmes sur lesquels le Monténégro doit encore progresser. Nos co-rapporteurs le soulignent et les autorités monténégrines le reconnaissent elles-mêmes. En effet, le rapport de nos collègues relève qu'en dépit de réels progrès, des signaux négatifs concernant la transparence des procédures de recrutement et de nomination des juges ont récemment été envoyés dans une société où le système judiciaire est perçu comme vulnérable à l'influence politique et où la taille réduite des professions judiciaires peut être considérée comme favorisant l'esprit de corps. Enfin, la question de l'indépendance des médias revêt une importance capitale pour garantir le bon fonctionnement des institutions démocratiques. Sur ce sujet également, les progrès sont limités. Les médias continuent de subir des pressions économiques et politiques, les journalistes continuent d'être victimes d'agressions, et si les auteurs sont désormais recherchés et arrêtés, on peut déplorer que les commanditaires ne soient que rarement identifiés. Les ingérences politiques dans les activités des organes de régulation des médias suscitent également des inquiétudes. Je voterai donc ce projet de résolution en demandant au Conseil de l'Europe de poursuivre sa collaboration avec le Monténégro. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Fournier. La prochaine, Madame Liliane Tanguy, le groupe Adler.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Messieurs les rapporteurs, chers collègues, au nom du groupe ALDE, je tiens à saluer la qualité des travaux des deux co-rapporteurs. Ce rapport, ainsi que le projet de résolution associé, nous éclaire sur les événements ayant marqué la vie politique du Monténégro ces dernières années et identifie avec précision les défis à venir en matière d'état de droit pour ce pays qui joue un rôle positif dans la stabilisation de la région des Balkans occidentaux.
Notre commission du suivi estime que le Monténégro a fait quelques progrès en matière d'indépendance du pouvoir judiciaire, mais qu'un important chemin reste à parcourir dans le respect notamment des avis de la Commission de Venise. Le rapport laisse entendre que le Monténégro semble avoir atteint un plafond de verre et que la nouvelle coalition au pouvoir devra démontrer une réelle volonté politique afin d'obtenir les résultats plus tangibles, en particulier dans la lutte contre la corruption et la situation des médias, domaines dans lesquels aucun progrès significatif n'a été observé. Les corapporteurs sont aussi particulièrement préoccupés par la situation des journalistes, dont certains subissent des pressions, notamment par le biais de procédures judiciaires et de détention. La Commission européenne note également dans sa communication en 2020 que des problèmes persistent concernant l'indépendance du pouvoir judiciaire, le déroulé des élections, la liberté de la presse et que le Monténégro devrait se montrer plus proactif dans ses efforts de réforme. Compte tenu de ces constats et des évolutions récentes, les co-rapporteurs ont identifié 4 domaines dans lesquels notre Assemblée doit poursuivre le dialogue post-suivi, à savoir l'indépendance du pouvoir judiciaire, la lutte contre la corruption, la situation des médias et la loi sur la liberté de religion. Face à ces défis, afin de garantir le respect des valeurs fondamentales du Conseil de l'Europe, il me semble particulièrement important, ainsi qu'à mon groupe ALDE, que le nouveau gouvernement entré en fonction à la fin de l'année dernière agisse dans ces domaines. L'engagement des réformes ambitieuses en faveur du respect de l'état de droit apparaît d'autant plus nécessaire que le Monténégro appuie parfois son développement économique sur le soutien de bailleurs de fonds qui bafouent quelques-unes des valeurs fondamentales du Conseil de l'Europe. Le respect des obligations et engagements nés de l'adhésion au Conseil de l'Europe est d'une importance capitale si le Monténégro veut que le dialogue post-suivi prenne fin. C'est également une condition essentielle à satisfaire dans les négociations en vue de l'adhésion de ce pays à l'Union européenne, qui reste une priorité de ses autorités et qui doit pouvoir se refléter dans les politiques publiques engagées. Je vous invite donc, chers collègues, à voter en faveur de ce rapport et du projet de résolution. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Tanguy. We'll try now to get a connection to Mr. Josip Juratovic. He's supposed to represent the socialist group. Is he now online? He is on the line. Please.
Sehr geehrter Herr Präsident, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, ich teile die Sicht der deutschen Bundesregierung, dass die faktische Darstellung und Einschätzung in dem Berichtszeitraum grundsätzlich zutreffen. Der erste demokratische Machtwechsel in Montenegro seit Erlangung seiner Unabhängigkeit vor 30 Jahren zeigt uns, dass demokratische Institutionen in Montenegro funktionieren. Ob dies aber nach den neuesten Entwicklungen in Montenegro so bleibt, ist meines Erachtens nach sehr fraglich. Denn bereits jetzt zeichnet sich ab, dass die gegenwärtige Regierung, die aus einer Bewegung gegen die alte Machthaber entstand, mit der Führung dieses Landes völlig überfordert ist. Vor allem durch die zunehmende Spaltung des Landes, befeuert durch altbekannte Nationalismen des Westbalkans, droht Montenegro in den Zustand der Balkankonflikte der 90er Jahre zurückzufallen. Dies gilt es zu verhindern, mit Hilfe der internationalen Gemeinschaft. Vor allen Dingen sollte die EU in enger Kooperation mit der Regierung vor Ort für einen EU-konformen Aufbau staatlicher Institutionen sorgen. Dabei ist insbesondere die Abkehr von Nationalismen wichtig. Gleichzeitig muss sich das Land konsequent an einem Fundament der Menschenrechte, vor allem der Freiheit und Gleichheit aller Bürgerinnen und Bürger Montenegros orientieren. Das zweite Problem folgt in Kürze. Ab 1. Juli muss Montenegro die erste Rate des Kredits für den Bau der völlig überteuerten Autobahn von Hafen Bar nach Serbien bezahlen. Montenegro ist nicht in der Lage, das Projekt zu finanzieren, was bedeutet, dass diese Autobahn oder irgendein anderes Staatseigentum in Besitz von China übergeht. Dies ist ein wichtiges
Infrastrukturprojekt auch für Europa. Deshalb muss man Montenegro dringend bei der Lösung dieses Problems unterstützen. Montenegro darf nicht verloren gehen. Dankeschön für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit.
Dankeschön. Now we go to the speakers list. As I said, we do have the 6 speakers. I tried to defend them all to have the right to speak. First, we have Mr. Stefan Schenach from Austria, please. Stefan.
Dankeschön, Herr Präsident. Zuerst gratuliere ich einmal den beiden Berichterstattern für ihre Arbeit in Montenegro. Ich selber war in den letzten 10 Jahren intensiv auch in diesen Prozess verwickelt und es war richtig, dass wir das strikte Monitoring in ein Post-Monitoring verwandelt haben. Es zeigt auch Erfolge. Einer der größten Erfolge ist, wenn ein demokratischer Wechsel nach einer Wahl passiert, wie wir das seinerzeit in Georgien hatten mit dem Georgian Dream als ein Leuchtturm. Die Entwicklung aber in Montenegro ist nach wie vor nicht so, dass wir das Postmonitoring schließen können. Ich glaube, ich war der letzte Vorsitzende des Monitoring-Komitees, der ein Postmonitoring mit Monaco schließen konnte. Und seither haben wir keinen solchen Prozess mehr gehabt. Aber es gibt ein paar Dinge, die extrem besorgniserregend sind. Das eine, das sage ich als Generalberichterstatter für Freiheit der Medien und Sicherheit der Journalisten, ist die wirklich untragbare Situation der Medien und vor allem für Journalisten und Journalistinnen. Nach wie vor wie ein Geschwür die Korruption. Und das Wahlgesetz muss verändert werden. Und wir hatten im Rahmen dieses Berichts auch eine lange Aussprache mit der Venice Commission. Und die zeigt, dass auch das Justizsystem sowohl bei den Richtern und Richterinnen als auch bei den Staatsanwälten und Staatsanwältinnen extrem besorgniserregend ist und dass hier einiges auf uns zukommt und auch das kommt in diesem Bericht über Montenegro zum Ausdruck. Das heißt, es wird noch eine ziemlich schwierige Zeit und ich hoffe sehr, ich liebe das Land sehr und Montenegro ist so eine kleine Insel mit der See und den Bergen, aber mit so vielen Ethnien und diese Ethnien sind zusammengeblieben. Das heißt, wir haben albanische Ethnie, bosnische Ethnie, serbische Ethnie und das hat einen so hohen Wert, dass wir gemeinsam und mit den Berichterstattern hier mit Montenegro hier die notwendigen Unterstützung geben können, nachdem jetzt zum ersten Mal durch eine Wahl ein Regierungswechsel erfolgt ist. Aber diese Wahlgesetze, die gehören trotzdem verändert und adaptiert. Nur, dass man eine Wahl gewinnt, heißt nicht, dass die Wahlgesetze okay sind. In diesem Sinne hoffe ich, dass wir alle diesen Bericht mit einer großen Mehrheit annehmen. Danke.
Thank you very much, Stefan. You are coming from Austria, which is one of those rare countries in Europe which doesn't have a seaside. That's why you are saying that Montenegro is island. I agree with that, with that statement. I understood exactly what you wanted to say. Now we listen some Montenegrin representatives. We start with Mr. Dragan Krapovic. Now, interesting to listen what you are saying. You have to be saying. You want to say. Please. Is Mr. Dragan Krapovic on the line? We want to really listen some Montenegrins also. Do you have so rich, ethnic, harmonious society? Please.
Thank you. Dear President, dear colleagues, the current political moment in Montenegro is very specific. As you already know, we have had an unprecedented change of government through elections. As stated in the draft resolution, there has been a peaceful change of government, which is a sign of democratic maturity. But in post-election period, we are facing continued polarization of the society, and narratives and series of political moves aimed at raising tensions in Montenegro. The recent events and incidents in city of Pljevlja and Nikšić and so on are unacceptable for us, and I want to strongly condemn it today. This has to stay in the past, and we believe that there is political will on all sides in Montenegro to overcome these challenges. We suggest as a party, Democratic Montenegro, that political representatives of minorities have their place in every future government of Montenegro. Many times, Mr. Bečić, Speaker of the Montenegrin Parliament, publicly pointed out our proposal to make participation of minority political representatives in every authority and every future government of Montenegro, generally accepted and unwritten political rule. Also, it is very important that I address the issue of the rule of law and fight against crime and corruption in Montenegro. I emphasize that recently the Venice Commission stated there is a true need for reform, and that in that process, our party demonstrated its readiness to reach the best legal solutions through cooperation with the European Commission and the Council of Europe, of course, meaning Venice Commissions. That being said, it is important to understand that it is absolutely necessary for personal and generational changes to happen within the judiciary and prosecutor's office. If this does not happen, or if it is delayed too long, I'm afraid that any future reform will lose its meaning and we will not have the needed results. In this regard, on behalf of Democratic Montenegro, and in many other, like respect for human rights and freedoms, media freedoms, electoral reform, environmental protection, sustainable development, and so on, we emphasize our readiness to conduct a dialogue, to work together to find adequate solutions to all challenges. Dialogue, along with mutual respect and understanding, is the only way to overcome the challenges we are facing today, and we are fully committed to that approach. Thank you very much for your attention. Stay to the co-rapporteurs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Krapovic. Now we'll listen another voice from Montenegro, Madam Mrs. Maja Vukicevic. Please. Voice? No voice, please. We don't hear anything. Try again. We don't hear. Pity. Try again, yes. That's a good idea to try to have a new connection. Here, once again. We can see you, we cannot hear you. You should refresh your request to speak. Try to do that once again. Once again, request to speak. Now, yes. We have a temper. We have temper for you. We can see you, but don't. Try to press F5 and start once again. No, we cannot hear anything from you. Madam, you should, let's do so that you must refresh your page with F5, press F5. Let's do now, so madam, there's no way of wasting time. You will have later on, we will later on hear you. Now we take Mrs. Susanna Lepšimenko, but we will return back to Madam Vukicevic later on. Now, Slovenia, Zuzana Lepšimenko.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, it works. We cannot see you, but we can hear you. That's better.
Okay.
Now we can see you.
Now
Please.
we can see me
Okay,
as well.
good.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, first allow me to congratulate the reporters for their work. I also welcome the monitoring committee's acknowledgement of the substantial progress Montenegro has made since the adoption of the last report on the post-monitoring dialogue in 2015. In my intervention, I would like to refer only to one specific paragraph in the report of the co-reportators, the content on which, as it is now, might not be properly understood. It concerns paragraph 37 in chapter The Law on Freedom of Religion, where there is a sentence between the sentences with footnotes 25 and 26 that reads as follows. This discrimination would be the latest of many inflicted on Serbs, not only in Montenegro, but also in other neighboring countries, which is then explained in footnote 26 as follows. The Serbian member of the collegial presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Mr. Dodik, mentioned that Serbs' rights were also threatened in Slovenia, where they cannot obtain the status of national minority. As this explanation, as now placed under the chapter on freedom of religion, could be understood in the sense that Serbs in Slovenia are deprived of religious right, which cannot be further from the truth. I suggest that this sentence in paragraph 37 be deleted. Also, it has no direct connection to the subject of the main theme, which is honoring the obligations and commitments by Montenegro in the field of freedom of religion. And just to clarify the situation to which the quoted statement refers, our constitution speaks of autochthonous national minorities, that is, people that live in the same settlement area as in the past, but have been cut off from their kin states by the borders. Serbs, on the other hand, immigrated to Slovenia in the context of labor migration. They are not considered an autochthonous national minority, like, for example, Hungarians and Italians, but still enjoy all other rights provided by the Constitution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now we will try to go to Montenegro, but it's Mr. Predrag Sekulic. Hopefully we can hear you and see you also, particularly here. Is the connection there? Seems to be also because of the interpretation, etc., etc. I must leave two other speakers out. Hopefully, Mr. Predrag Sekulic, we can hear from you. It's over. It would be useful to have somebody from Montenegro anyhow. Neither nor. No, neither. But if the connection is, I would like really to have one Montenegrin, but either or. Sekulic, is it now? Yes, good. Mr. Sekulic, you are the last speaker. Unfortunately, we have to stop after you, but we wanted to listen also on another speech from Montenegro. Please.
Maybe it's better my colleague Maja.
You decide, either or.
Maja, please.
You are in the same room. Pity that we didn't listen to you. So, Maja, now we can both see and hear, at least we could hear Mr. Sekulic. No.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me now. Thank you. I have carefully read your report and I agree that we still have some problems in key areas, as you have noticed. The Montenegrin judiciary has long been identified as the main problem. As you have noted, several judges have been elected in more than 2 permitted terms, whereas at the moment there are also more than 40 judges who formally meet the conditions for retirement. I agree that there were several court decisions which annulled the illegal decisions of the former authorities. On the other hand, there have also been many situations where the courts have dealt with political opponents of the former regime. We have had several fabricated cases against opposition politicians, against journalists, and against people who oppose the authorities. As you have noticed, corruption was a big problem in Montenegro. Both affairs you mentioned, the audio affair and the envelope affair, haven't been resolved to the end. We planned on adopting 2 laws in the field of prosecution, but after receiving the opinion of the Venice Commission, that was not carried out. Taking into the account the recommendations of the Commission, the changes to the current law on the State Prosecution Service were suggested. That law will soon be in the official procedure. I must mention that the changes in the prosecution are necessary in order for Montenegro to cope with organized crime and corruption effectively. The prosecutorial organization has long been privatized and under the political influence of the former regime. The fabricated assumptions that the proposed laws were directed against the chief special prosecutor are simply not true. We have nothing against the institution of the special prosecutor, but the fact is that the special prosecutor's office is in a great need for new management. The evidence for this claim arises from the fact that not enough has been done for fighting against crime and corruption. We welcome all the suggestions from our European partners, but we also hope that you understand the desperate need for change in this area in Montenegro. As you noted, 2 key events that marked the previous year were peaceful protests against the law on freedom of religion and parliamentary elections. There was a change of government in the elections, and apart from a few incidents that were mostly staged, there were no other tensions. We adopted changes to the law on freedom of religion. The voting has had to be held twice after the president refused to sign the law. The new law on freedom of religion is much better, more fair, and protects the property of all religious communities. Regarding the part related to the non-canonical Montenegrin Orthodox Church, which exists in Montenegro as a non-governmental organization, I cannot agree with the statement about the number of people who are followers of that organization. That number certainly doesn't exceed 5% of the population of Montenegro. Even with some problems and slow progress in the main areas, I believe the reason for optimism exists. As the new parliamentary majority, we are ready to work together to solve the problems that burden Montenegro's European path, to which we are all committed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm really sorry I must leave 2 other persons who were in the list out. We anyhow heard 2 opinions from Montenegro. The debate is now closed, and I allow now the rapporteur, Mr. Co-Chair, to react. 3 minutes maximum.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. En écoutant les rapporteurs des groupes, je crois que le constat est général de dire qu'au fond, c'est un bilan en demi-teinte. Il y a énormément qui a été fait, il y a énormément de progrès, il faut s'en féliciter, il faut le souligner. Et les collègues qui se sont exprimés dans ce sens ont raison de le faire. Il faut même le souligner de manière appuyée. Et puis, il y a encore un grand chemin à faire. Et nous devons le faire ensemble. M. Famelos, par exemple, a parlé de volonté, de will, de volonté politique de faire les réformes. Et beaucoup ont parlé du dialogue. M. Krapovic aussi a évoqué ce dialogue, cette volonté d'avancer ensemble, ce respect, cette compréhension mutuelle. Et c'est vraiment dans cet esprit que cette Assemblée et que les co-rapporteurs veulent continuer de travailler. D'ailleurs, dans cet esprit, nous invitons le gouvernement du Monténégro à davantage consulter sur ces projets de réformes importantes avant de mettre ces projets sur la table. Il y a maintenant eu à 2 reprises sur des lois importantes, des projets de réforme qui ont été faits sans consultation préalable, créant des réactions. Et les consultations ont eu lieu par la suite avec des corrections. Il nous semblerait en fait plus efficace et plus souhaitable de faire les choses dans l'autre sens. S'agissant de Mme Vukicevic, vous avez évoqué une note de bas de page. En réalité, le chapitre auquel vous faites référence, il décrit la position des dirigeants serbes qui donnent un certain nombre d'arguments auxquels nous faisons référence. Et puis le chapitre suivant donne la position des autorités du Monténégro. Donc ce ne sont ni les rapporteurs ni l'Assemblée qui s'expriment ici. Il s'agit simplement d'une description du débat tel qu'il a lieu. Donc je ne crois pas qu'il y a de correction à apporter. Voilà, Monsieur le Président. S'agissant encore peut-être, dernière remarque, s'agissant de la remarque de Mme Sekulic, on comprend bien l'intention, et la Commission de Venise a dit la même chose, des autorités monténégrines d'améliorer l'efficacité du ministère public et du bureau du procureur spécial. Et c'est un souhait de cette Assemblée que la lutte contre la corruption soit plus efficace. But you shouldn't only do the right thing, you should do it the right way. La manière de faire cette réforme est extrêmement importante. Et là, les recommandations de la Commission de Venise sont absolument essentielles. Merci pour ce débat, merci pour ces interventions de toutes et tous. Et sur la suite de ce bilan en demi-teinte, eh bien, le but, c'est maintenant de travailler ensemble dans le dialogue et dans le respect. Et c'est dans ce sens-là que les co-rapporteurs souhaitent la prolongation de ce dialogue post-suivi et souhaitent continuer de travailler. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cottier. You very quickly make your statement. I appreciate that we are over time already. So now, Mr. Rojan, Vice Chair of the committee, would you like to speak? 1 minute solely. Sorry. If you want 1 minute. 1 minute, 15 seconds, I allow. Mr. Rojan. Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Madam.
Thank you.
Madam.
Thank you. As you know, Montenegro is one of the 3 countries with which the Assembly is engaged in a post-monitoring dialogue, the other 2 being North Macedonia and Bulgaria. In its resolution on Montenegro, the Assembly has put clear conditions for Montenegro to fulfill if it wanted the post-monitoring dialogue to come to an end. Although the co-rapporteurs have noted some progress, they have not proposed to close the post-monitoring dialogue, and the monitoring committee unanimously supported their views. I urge our Montenegrin colleagues to use this opportunity to demonstrate that they want to address the 4 key areas identified by the Assembly and that they want to end the post-monitoring dialogue. In this way, Montenegro will continue to play its model role in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was really quick. And now we move on the decision-making side of the whole issue. The debate is totally closed. The Monitoring Committee has proposing this resolution with 7 amendments. Since amendments 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7 were unanimously approved by the committee, I would like to ask, are there any objections about those 6 amendments which was made? If not, no opposition or objections, those have been approved unanimously. So 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 and 7 amendments were agreed. In terms of the amendment number 1, it was also adopted unanimously by the committee. However, as it is the subject of a sub-amendment, it will be discussed in the usual way. And now we will move to this first to this number 1, amendment number 1, and I will ask Mr. Cottier on behalf of the Monitoring Committee, would you like to support the amendment number 1?
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Il s'agit en fait de tenir compte des recommandations de la Commission de Venise et d'insister sur ce que nous avons dit tout à l'heure dans le rapport et ce que plusieurs orateurs ont dit aujourd'hui sur l'importance d'implémenter cet avis dans le cadre des réformes en cours du ministère public, de manière à ne pas privilégier une efficacité du ministère public, mais au détriment de l'état de droit et au détriment de l'indépendance de la justice. Donc, comme ce débat est extrêmement actuel, il nous semblait important d'actualiser cette question. Et d'ailleurs, nous soutenons le sous-amendement de M. Chénard qui va encore dans le sens d'une précision et d'une actualisation du texte.
Thanks. And now I call Mr. Chénard to support the sub-amendment. Please, the floor is yours.
Danke sehr, Herr Präsident. I'm presenting a sub-amendment from a lot of over all the groups we have in the House, especially after our discussion with the Venice Commission and after the report of the Venice Commission. We want to add that there is the risk of politicization of the members of the Prosecutorial Council. And I know that our rapporteurs both are in favor of that, and so I want to present and ask you to support it as it was also supported in the Monitoring Committee.
Thanks a lot. And is there anybody else who would like to support? No, it's not necessary. Actually, now it's only a question that was, what is the opinion of committee? Can you maybe, rapporteur, indicate what is the opinion of committee concerning sub-amendment?
Oui, au principe, c'est, je crois, la présidente de la commission qui doit le dire, mais enfin, la commission a soutenu le sous-amendement à l'unanimité, moins une voix.
Okay, that's fine. Then I shall now put the amendment to the vote. Sorry, obviously. I will now put the sub-amendment to the vote first, and then amendment. Sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is clear, open. Okay, vote is closed, and the result? It's approved with clear majority. Now we come to the main amendment number 1. Does anyone want to speak against the amendment number 1 as approved, as changed? What is the opinion of committee? Supposedly, yes. Yes, it's very clear. Now we should put the whole amendment number 1 as approved earlier to the vote. The vote is open. And the vote is closed. It was approved with great majority. And now we will move to the last stage of the whole process concerning the whole resolution itself as amended with these 7 amendments there. You know the procedure. The overall vote concerning this report is declared open. Vote is open. Vote is closed. The resolution on Montenegro is clearly approved. Thanks very much. The item is ended. Now we are in a very, very final stage. Thanks very much. It has been a long, long day. Thanks for participation. The Assembly will hold the next meeting tomorrow morning, starting at 9 o'clock. The agenda was approved already Monday. I remind you that we'll start actually tomorrow. The first item of business is a communication from the Committee of Ministers, and after that we'll continue with the Navalny debate, as you can expect. So today, thanks a lot once again. The sitting is adjourned. We'll see you tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Thanks very much for interpreters. Thanks very much indeed. You work very late, actually 10 minutes extra. Super. Thanks.